Good afternoon and welcome to today's meeting of the Rural and Farming Executive Advisory Committee. Welcome also to those watching the meeting on YouTube. During the live broadcast, members and officers are asked to please ensure that mobile phones are placed in silent mode. Only audio from the microphones will be captured on the live stream, therefore please ensure that they are switched on when speaking and switched off when you've finished speaking. I'll now start the meeting formally with agenda item 1. Is to appoint the chairman for the remainder of the municipal year for 2023-24. Do I have a proposal, please? Councillor Mrs French.
Thank you. I'd like to appoint Councillor Tim Taylor.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Marks. Thank you. Are there any other nominations? Thank you very much. It is therefore proposed that Councillor Taylor is appointed as the Chairman of the Rural and Farming Executive Advisory Committee for the remainder of the municipal year 2023-24.
Thank you very much, everyone, for appointing me chairman of this committee. I'd like to move on to agenda item number 2, to call upon member services, please, to report any apologies for absence.
Good afternoon. We have apologies from Councillor Laws and Councillor Humphrey. Sorry, Councillor Humphrey. Sorry.
Thank you. So on to agenda item number 3 is to appoint a vice chairman for the remainder of the municipal year 2023-2024. Have I got a proposer for a nomination, please? I'll propose Jan French if I can, please. Have I got a seconder? Thank you, Steve. So, sorry, have we got any other nominations for a vice chair? So, that's therefore proposed that Councillor French is appointed the vice chair. So agenda item number 4 is to report additional items for consideration which the chairman deems urgent by virtue of special circumstances now to be specified. Anglian Water have requested if they can be moved from agenda item number 9 to number 8. Is this okay with everybody?
Yep.
Yeah, right. That item number 5 is to receive any declarations of interest and the local code of conduct in respect of any items to be discussed at this meeting. If you've got anything to declare, can you please raise it now? So I have, with having some land on the area of where the reservoir is going to be supposedly placed. Anybody else?
I think we're all Anglian Water ratepayers.
Yeah,
but we pay them, they don't pay us.
Absolutely. So Councillor Taylor will leave the room at that point and we'll hand over to Councillor French to lead that agenda item.
Agenda item number 6 is the committee term of reference. Sorry, Councillor Clark.
I own some land down Creek Road, but I don't think that should interfere with any of my decision making on this committee.
So right, agenda item number 6
Sorry, Chair, I was just thinking about this. I'm on various drainage boards that may be affected by Anglian Water, and also we've got a speaker from NFU, and we actually do our household insurance through NFU.
I sit on 11 drainage boards. If anybody else does or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm on a couple of drainage boards, although I don't think they're immediately affected, but there could be an impact.
Councillor Count, you was welcoming, nobody left at this rate.
Nothing to declare, Chair, but while we're on the subject, it just occurs to me that Anglian Water piece is an update information piece only. There's no decision making, so can there really be any conflict of interest if you're just listening to someone?
We have asked that question of the monitoring officer, and in the case of Councillor Taylor, it is definitely a DPI that needs to be declared in this case.
Right. So agenda item number 6 is the committee term of reference upon the Rural and Farming Executive Advisory Committee to reflect upon the flooding issues affecting the district, pages 3 and 4 in the report. Councillor French for the proposer. Can I have a seconder for it, please? Councillor Booth. Thank you. So I now open the item for discussion. Please raise your hands if you've got any comments to make on it. So through the committee now, we've brought in drainage to where a lot of the planning applications are now coming to me as well to look at for drainage strategies to try and prevent flooding, working with middle level and the water boards to try and assist them where we can. Because middle level are in deep trouble. A lot of their systems are full, can't cope with any more surface water. So it's something we really need to look at and work with them really closely. Nobody knows the lie of the land and the drains better than farmers. They work it all their life. But at the moment, when we're saying we're full, we can't cope with any more, we're full, we can't cope with any more. We're very, very close to flooding. St Germans is at capacity. They can't handle any more. So we've got to be really, really careful how we work with this one. Thank you, guys.
Can it just be noted I'm a member of the planning committee?
Yeah, well, I'm a reserve member, but it's public knowledge that we're all members, respective members of the planning committee. I guess the other thing, obviously, about the flooding is, yes, it's an issue. The trouble we have is that the legislation is so fragmented and disparate, and you've got so many different organisations involved because the county council's the lead flood authority. You've got, obviously, middle level, which are the lead for the drainage boards. I guess the question for us is, what is our actual role in that? Because obviously also you've got the Environment Agency, which will step in if there is a so-called emergency, which we're sort of on the cusp of something happening with the amount of water, because soil moisture deficit's at 0%. Any more comes along, we are going to be flooded, and there is plenty of water sitting out in the fields now. But as a district council, what is our role? Given all the different legislative aspects that are given to different organisations, I'm not aware that actually as a district council there's anything specific. Obviously there's planning, but that's more about policy setting in consideration when applications are set.
Yeah, I hear what you say, Councillor Booth, but in planning we do take into consideration the flooding because, we know our own areas. And we have great concerns, especially with the amount of water we've had over the last, I think since October.
Yeah, I think for me, it goes back to the terms of reference for the committee that we're a voice for the farming community. What Councillor Taylor said was nobody knows the land better than the farmers. And I think that's particularly relevant in our case in Fenland, because the nature of our drainage is quite unique because of our low-level lying land, our ditch structures, our pumping stations. We're quite different to other areas. So it's important that when the Lead Flood Authority and all the other agencies listen to people who are experts in flooding, they listen to people such as ourselves that can represent the voice of the farming community, who have got a hands-on experience of how their fields, etc., are being, the water table, etc., is affecting them, as well as, the impact on the urban community. So I think it's important we give them a voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Councillor Clark?
Yeah, on top of that, the majority of farmers sit on IDP boards, so their voice is pretty strongly heard anyway. And I can't say.
Yeah, can it be noted, I also sit on Cambridge County Council Flood Group.
I mean, yeah, I realise that we are the voice of farmers. We're also the voice of the rural community and the villages. Let's not forget that. But I think one of the problems that we do acknowledge in the drainage boards is that people just don't realise what the work is that's done behind the scenes to keep the the water systems flowing and the amount of maintenance that takes place. And there probably needs to be more knowledge about that in the wider community. And I've said this numerous times before, but I think the question still remains: are we just a voice then for these, for the farming and the rural communities? There's no actual legislative powers we've got, apart from the planning process, which we're all fully aware of.
It's a grave shame that Councillor Laws isn't here today. She's very, very clued up with the drainage and on all the flood watches and everything. Because middle level aren't statutory consultees, they can actually get overridden on varied planning decisions or whatever. But Councillor Laws is trying to get either ourselves or middle level as statutory consultees to move forwards for the future times to come, for us to really assist within the drainage and the flooding industry within the Fens.
I think the other thing just to note, obviously this is an advisory committee, an executive advisory committee. So if there are recommendations that we wish to make to the executive, then we're able to through this committee itself.
I completely understand what you're saying with regards to planning, and actually the point about IDBs not being statutory consultees is a point I've raised, and I've recommended myself in the local plan that actually it's the IDB's knowledge is taken on board, because I personally think that's going to be better than the Environment Agency, which sit in their offices at the regional offices far away from where the issues are happening. So I don't disagree with that. I guess the other issue is also that I know that there is a special interest group now at the LGA regarding how IDBs are funded. Are we going to potentially feed into that because of being what is called a low water area? We receive water from the uplands, as it were, and it flows through our systems. But the cost for it has to come out of Fenland taxpayers, basically, or from the government through the general grant. So are we going to play more of an active role in that and try and give some guidance on that?
As you will know, that Fenland do pay a great deal of money. I think last year we paid £1.5 million to the drainage boards. But I did read an article some time ago that the government are giving additional money this year for the drainage boards. So I think when we all sit on our drainage boards, but Councillor Bowden actually sits on the Local Government Association, so I'm sure he's up to speed with what's there. If he wants to come in.
Just for clarity for Councillor Booth, I represent Fenland Council on the officers group for the SIG, and Councillor Miscandlin is also on the SIG from a member's point of view. And we're working with the IDBs, ADA, all sorts of other organisations. But that special interest group is about the way IDBs are funded. And we're working with them because we all recognise the great work that IDBs do. So it's about how they're funded and the impact they have on a smallish number of councils, which is, doesn't affect a large number. So we're working on a new funding mechanism so that we don't bear the brunt of that special levy, which is actually going to be over 2 million for 24, 25. Yeah.
No, it's pretty much that point that we're already taking an active role and a member of the, basically those hardest hit by the funding arrangements as they are, and we're already active within that, and this year was successful.
Thank you. I think also it comes down to education. As we've heard, we live in one of the wettest parts of the country. A lot of people don't understand, and I have to say, I'm fairly upset looking at some of the farming ditches as well. They are not keeping the ditches cleaner. Now, whether that is something we can work with the NFU to try and promote, and also other parties as well, because there's CCC land that I know with dikes that are blocked. And I look around, we need to all work together. And the same with Anglian Water. There are certain times, certainly in the village I live in, where we have flooding issues, and it's not quite clear whose problems it is, whether it's a CCC drain, whether it's an Anglian Water drain, and on we go. But the problem is, when you're standing there at 11 o'clock at night, and you're seeing houses flooding, we need to do more education, and I feel that's something as a group we should do as well, and working with the farmers.
Yeah, I totally understand. We're a member of that group, but I said my question was more about how this advisory committee feeds into that process. Councillor Scanlon's obviously the representative, but are we going to be inviting him to this committee to discuss it, try and get an idea, put our views across?
Yeah, I've no issues with that at all. Anybody else? No? Councillor Friend?
Yeah, can I suggest that you also at some stage invite the lead flood authority at County Council. She is an expert in her field, and also we have got Brian Hefferman, who is the enforcement for flooding across County Council. They do take flooding very seriously. Yeah, just to go back for Councillor Clark, at County Council, they are actually mapping out every dike across, and I'm sure Councillor Count can explain in depth because he is actually the leader of our group. But they are spending a considerable time and financial actually looking at all the dikes, digging them out, cleaning them out, and we've got a particularly bad one which has gone on for about 25 years at on Mark South, which is Sycamore. And finally, it's been started. There's another 2 roads that are going to follow in phase 2 and phase 3. So they really are taking these things serious.
Just for clarification, Councillor Booth, the role of the SIG is very, very is focused on the funding, not the roles of IDBs, etc., etc. I'm more than happy to bring an update on the work the SIG is doing for the funding, but it is a very narrow piece of work, and it's the funding of the IDBs, not anything beyond that.
I totally accept that, but the funding is the core, the development of infrastructure that needs to be put in place. So it has quite a wide-ranging effect. The funding does need to be put in place properly and the right mechanisms. Let's not forget the impact it has, because some of these IDBs are sort of saving up for 20 odd years to try and get some major infrastructure put in, like pumping stations. Is that going to be put at risk by the proposals? I think, it'd be good to get an update on that.
Any more questions on that subject at all? No? We'll close that one down. So agenda item number 7. It's a report in recent motions to full council in relation to the farming and rural matters. So for the next steps. So can we have a proposer for the report? And the seconder for the report, please.
No, Steve did.
So I now open the items for discussion. So please raise your hands if you've got any comments to make on the motions that we've made recently. Councillor Counts.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't know if this will be a regular facet of the farming and rural committees, but it seems to me that if we have motions that are fully debated at full council, then what are they going to do when they get here? Because we've already debated them. So we're not adding any new recommendations. So realistically, what I'd like to perhaps say is we could do the action log monitoring to make sure that the actions get taken out. But apart from that, somebody might have something to say on the motions themselves, but we've already debated them once. I'd just like to see what are we going to do as a committee about them. So perhaps the action log monitoring.
So just to answer your question, Councillor Kent, is that once the motions have gone through, I've got the DEFRA Minister on speed dial at the minute to hit him with everything we can get while we can get it to get the industry moving right. We've got one that has just gone through. I received some paperwork last night, but he beat me to it. I didn't have to motion it, fortunately. So, although once that's come out of full council, yes, I do then take lead with a lot of it and push to get things happening quickly, working with various MPs, not just our own. But if anybody's got any queries on anything within the motions that's gone through at the time, please just contact me and go, Tim, where are we with this? Because we just need to know. And then all advice is given freely, it's not a problem.
I think further just to add to Councillor Count's comments, I think you're absolutely right. It's the role of this committee to monitor the actions in accordance with those motions and ensure that they are taking place.
Yeah, I was just going to say, are we going to use the same sort of framework we use for ONS and corporate governance, basically, to do that? Yeah.
Big. A different page anyway. So there's no further speakers, so therefore the recommendations is for the Rural and Farming Committee to consider and note the previous motion to full council and associated activities to implement the agreed actions. So there's no raised hands, so therefore the recommendations is noted. Now bringing Anglian Water into this one. So this is where I've got to vacate the room, isn't it?
Thank you. We'll just give Councillor Taylor a minute to, and if we can invite Karen Staple, Joe Hillier, Matt Luke, Hugh Maxfield and Simon Jackson. Have you got enough room? Thank you. I understand that your intentions to provide the committee with a presentation in respect of the project. Please proceed accordingly. But we have all read your report, and I understand it's 27 pages, so please don't go through the whole report. If I can just ask you, whoever's going to speak first, make sure your mic's switched on, and when you turn it off, when you're finished.
Should we just leave this one on and we all feed into this one, guys? Okay. Yeah, we'll do. Okay, no worries. So, my name's Karen Staples. I'm the stakeholder lead on the Fens Reservoir. Here with a couple of colleagues today, which will go down the line. So, Joe, you want to?
So yeah, I'm Joe Hillier, so I'm Anglian Water and I'm the Programme Manager for Fens Reservoir.
Yep. Good afternoon. So I'm Matt Pluke and I head up environment and sustainability for the major infrastructure side of Anglian Water.
And my name's Hugh Maxfield. I work for Fisher German and we advise Anglian Water on land and property matters.
Cheers, thanks, guys. So as you point out, it's 27 slides. That's far too much. Our reason for putting that in there was I'm conscious that
So, doors are opening now. Sorry, could we just get Simon Jackson to introduce yourself and his purpose here?
Sorry, Simon, do apologise.
No, it's absolutely, I wasn't expecting that, but I'm Simon Jackson. I'm the Economic Growth Manager at Fenland District Council.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, it's a large presentation. Part of the reason for that was I was conscious that there were councillors' names that were familiar on the committee, so I know who have been involved in the reservoirs previously, and some names were less familiar. So I thought giving you that overview will enable you to get a good feel of the project, and we'll definitely flick through these slides because what we would like to do is take questions. So that is the aim of the presentation. So we'll give a bit of an overview of the presentation. Matt's going to do a piece on the wider systems work. That's the other projects that sit around the DCO projects that we're leading on, and also projects that we're partnering on within the area, and talk a little bit about that. Hugh will give a bit of an update on where we are with support for landowners, and Joe is threading all that through with a bit of an overview of the programme and sort of looking at next steps, and I'll be talking about the second phase of consultation, which is due to come up at the end of May. So moving swiftly on, thank you. Can you go to the next slide, Joe?
Great.
Okay.
Great. Sorry. Thanks, guys. We do need to run through this really quickly, so I'll just give a brief overview. So apologies if I'm going through really fast on these initial ones, because we really want Matt to be able to talk about the sort of farming side of things. So really the first element is, why do we need, a new reservoir? I think we all appreciate the fact of, whilst we're experiencing lots of water at the moment, we also get periods where we don't have as much water. So we're facing into, change in the climate, which has meant there's potentially, or forecasted, could be less rain going forwards, maybe some more intense periods during the winter sort of months as well. There's obviously sort of growth in the various different regions as well, and really a key fundamental part of the Fens project as well is just a recognition of the fact that our current water sources are getting more and more stressed in terms of groundwater abstraction. So it's really thinking about how do we utilise all this water that's going out to the sea to actually help support the provision of the water supply going forwards. So from Anglian's water perspective, we're looking at three main sort of ways of meeting this challenge, and that's essentially associated with demand management. It's associated with fixing the leaks, and then it's also about new water supply options for looking at these sort of challenges going forwards. So why a sort of reservoir. I mean, there's potentially multiple different ways that we can do these things. Anglian Water has got a strategy going forward, and Cambridge Water has got a strategy going forwards, looking forward to 2050. And it's really thinking about how we're going to meet all these challenges. So this is part of the Water Resource Management Plan. So within there, it's thinking about, well, how do we actually provide this water we need to? So reservoirs, one option, desalination is another option, and water reuse is another option. And I think when we're looking at our plans, all of these options are required. So really the Fens Reservoir is what's considered a least regret option, i.e. no matter what we're looking at, and whichever way we look at the plan, the reservoir gets selected as an essential part of meeting this future demand, as well as desalination and these others, rather than it's either or. It really is a case of we need all these things to come online. We're really sort of facing into those challenges, thinking about, as I mentioned before, the environmental challenges of groundwater abstraction, thinking about how do we actually improve upon our drought resilience. So when we do get consecutive summers of low water, then effectively we've got that water supply for us going forward. So it's all part of this. And of course, with a reservoir, as opposed to something like desalination, you also get huge benefits associated with what the reservoir brings, socioeconomics, the recreation, a great place to go. So a lot of 2021-22 was about focused on siting that reservoir. Huge number of elements were looked at to actually try and select a site. So as you're aware, we've got two reservoirs, one up in Lincolnshire, one in the sort of Fenland area. There was over sort of 80 different sites were looked at through the site selection, focusing on things like how do we avoid, impacting communities, what about environmental resources in that area? How do we not only avoid impacting them, but think about how we link with them, thinking about sort of carbon elements of things, how it might feature in that landscape, socioeconomic benefits. And I suppose one of the key ones associated with the reservoir is ensuring it's actually got the right materials, it's founded on the right geology, there's no fault lines, it's got the right sort of clays, to actually site it in the right location. So through all of this, we identified a site near Chatteris as being effectively, the best location within the sort of Cambridgeshire, Fenland area. So, sure you all know where Chatteris is, so that's fine. In terms of the reservoir site itself, the main reservoir site, I'll come on to other elements in a minute, is situated just to the north of Chatteris, in between Chatteris and Wimbledon, just bordering Doddington. So you sort of see the pink area, which is the sort of key area for the reservoir, and the grey areas are essentially what we call associated with associated infrastructure. That's a bit of a mouthful, and I'll come on to that in a minute. So what does this reservoir look like? Well, we're still working that out at the moment, and we're looking to present, further information as part of the, upcoming consultation. But in terms of sort of some basic sort of vital statistics, I suppose, of what this reservoir is going to do for us collectively is, it is large. We are talking around about 5 square kilometres, something similar to Grapham, if you know that. The volume is around about 50 million cubic metres of usable volume, about 5 million cubic metres of water that will be held in the reservoir. It's going to supply somewhere in the region of 85 to 90 million cubic litres of water a day. So quite a significant water supply for us. It's got the potential to support growth, around the area, as well as, for this reservoir, it's really about helping to balance all these different demands, within the region. And, it's really sort of reliant on where can we get water from that otherwise would have gone out to sea, that we can effectively collect in the area and then use for sort of potable supply. So, thinking about sort of mid-levels area, effectively we're creating a bucket in a bucket, extracting water from the mid-levels and potentially supporting things like how we manage water resources in that area. Okay, I'm going to flick straight on to the next one. So
that's me. Okay, so as you're most probably aware, the planning process that we have to go through for this project is a development consent order, so it's classed as a nationally significant infrastructure project, and this is set out in the Planning Act, so this means we go to the planning inspector and it's signed off by the Secretary of State rather than the local planning authority. The key point on this slide really is the fact that the DCO process has there's a series of steps you have to go through the DCO process, and one of those key things is it's very much stakeholder led, so it's part of the process we need to be working with our community and our local stakeholders to ensure that we're taking into account all of the comments that are coming through, and that's being fed into design. So just very quickly, we had a phase 1 consultation once that site had been identified back in sort of September 2022. We had our first phase of consultation, and that lasted for a couple of months, for 8 weeks. Great attendance, some really good feedback, and that really helped us to then start this next phase of design and start to really sort of work up what the reservoir could look like, and also work out the site location for the associated infrastructure that needs to service the reservoir. Just very quickly, again, sort of the key issues, I'd say, key comments and issues coming back from FENS, I think very much people seeing the socio-economic opportunities, but with some caveats about ensuring that we are supporting our local sectors, particularly our agricultural sector, and that we are very aware of the need to improve community within the connectivity within the community, so how we can use the project to enable a better connectivity between the different towns and villages in the area, to make sure we are protecting nature as well as enhancing nature, and also providing facilities for recreation. And one of the key things that came out is the fact that we didn't mention it earlier, but it's an embankment reservoir, and therefore a key comment that came through that common feedback was, when you're designing it, how are you going to make sure that the embankments do fit into a flat landscape, basically, and that's what we've been working hard on over these last few months. Do you want to go on to just development?
Okay, so we've touched on the site itself, how we sort of selected that. So what we've been doing since then is really been a case of trying to characterise that site area. So we've got this large 5 square kilometre site, really getting good information around, the sort of ecology in the area, sort of recreation aspirations, talking to communities, etc. What is there, talking to the local farming community about, how they're managing their land, what the aspects are associated with it, thinking about the landscape. So all the elements that really go into that. We've also been doing ground investigation to prove the published geology from the British Geological Society, to ensure that what we believed was there is there, and there's nothing there that we didn't think was there. And so far I can say it's been really boring, so that's great as far as we're concerned. It is as the published geology. But we've also been looking, like we went through the site selection process for the main reservoir, we've been looking at the associated infrastructure and selecting that. So what do we mean by associated infrastructure? This diagram is purposefully really messy to give you an understanding of the scale of really what we're talking about. So you can see that blue block in the middle, that is the reservoir. So when we've talked about reservoir in the past, you've been thinking about something like Rutland, but there's so many more things that go around that feed into it that actually make this work as a system. So if we start on the left-hand side, we have that blue line representing a river. So this is one of our sources here that we need to abstract water from a river. Potentially we might need some form of treatment, such as invasive and non-native species treatment, or even sort of water quality treatment, to ensure that the water we're taking from one catchment and potentially putting it to another is fit for that use. We need to pump that water, from the river to the reservoir itself. Now we're looking at options for open channels, where we're using existing open channels to convey that water. We're also looking at pipeline options as well, to get the water to the reservoir. So once in the reservoir, of course, you've got large storage volumes, there's works associated with that. But we then need to, once we're looking for onward distribution, we need to treat that water. So there's a water treatment works there, which is making sure the water is wholesome and good for us to drink. We then need to transfer that water through to the various different locations where it's going to enter into the network. In the case of the Fens Reservoir, there's 2 different sort of locations that we're looking at. So one for the sort of East Anglian region, which is just to the sort of east of the reservoir, and then one to the south, which moves some of the water down to Cambridgeshire. and then goes into the onward distribution network. So you can see, there's quite a large scale in terms of what we're looking at that effectively ranges from Peterborough all the way down to Cambridge in terms of sort of scale. I'm going to jump over these two because it just goes into what I've said in a little bit more detail, and then move over to Matt to talk about the wider system.
You want
Oh, yeah,
you can control. Shall I take that? Or shall I try? Okay, it seems to be working. Is that okay? Yeah. So I want to talk about what we talk about the wider system. Let me explain that. That's perhaps not the most helpful term. So Joe's just talked about the public water supply reservoir that we're trying to develop and the associated infrastructure. As far as we're concerned, if all we develop is a public water supply reservoir associated infrastructure which does nothing else to meet recreation needs, environmental needs, we've failed. So we are clear that we want this public water supply reservoir to provide other benefits, so recreational benefits, for example. So that's what this slide is trying to convey, is that it's got to do more than just simply deliver a certain amount of water at a certain time. Our ambition that we have as an organisations, Cambridge Water and Anglian Water, is captured in a document which is online, so I don't intend to work through that, but that is available online. The link is there, and it talks about how we, and this is the important bit, with others could work together to make the public water supply solution so much better for our region. So that's what's captured in there. If we go to the next slide. So this talks to some work that we've already done. So let me explain what's on that slide. At the bottom there is the Fens and Links reservoir projects. Those are nationally significant infrastructure projects which have got to follow the strict development consent order rules, fully justify any compulsory land purchase on public water supply grounds, got to be funded by water customers. We can only fund what we can do with water customers. Yet, on the top of that slide, we recognise that numerous stakeholders have great ambition for our region. And one of the ways in which it's expressed, if you're familiar with it, is something called Future Fens Integrated Adaptation. So this is an initiative to not just respond to the challenges of the changing climate, but do it in a way which could also deliver environmental and social prosperity. So it's very ambitious, and it's a large number of organisations working together to see what they could do, recognising that one of the significant investments, one of the significant initiatives within that is us developing this reservoir. So how can this reservoir be developed in a way which supports development of these wider benefits? So we've previously done some work with others. When I say we, I always mean the global we when I'm talking about this, is that we've worked with so many different stakeholders to look at, and that's what this diagram shows, is how by looking upstream, downstream, together we could develop opportunities. So it would require investment. So that document, there's a link there which takes you to the document. What that in headline terms identifies is that if together we invest £1 billion in the region to address some problems, but also to realise some benefits, some of which, but not all of which, are associated with the reservoir, that can actually deliver back benefit into the region 5-6-fold. So it's really ambitious. It would require levels of investment that are typically not made in the environment sector, and so it would require changing some getting some big financial institutions involved as well. But that's the huge ambition that we've already sort of explored with others, and I'd recommend looking at that report. If we go on to the next slide. The Reservoir Project team are one of the stakeholders who can help to enable that wider vision. And so what are we working on from within the Reservoir Projects teams? Well, through developing the reservoir, through the option selection process of those associated infrastructure, we've looked for opportunities which stakeholders have said to us they'd love to see come forward because they're a gateway to other opportunities. The most obvious of which is open channels. So wherever possible, please can we use open channels to transfer raw water to the reservoir rather than pipes. And so as part of our option selection process, we are desperately trying to consider those in preference where we can to pipes. Equally, they need to stack up. So that's one thing we've done. That's just the top left-hand box. Strategies and studies. We've done numerous strategies and studies looking at how we could stretch ourselves around, let me pick on one, recreation, for example. What recreational facilities could be delivered around the reservoir as part of the DCO, or others could be invited to come along and deliver. The one I wanted to point out in particular there, actually I put them down as, no, there's one, so food and farming studies, so I put them in the plural. We recognise that we are developing the solution in a vitally important agricultural area, and we will, through the environmental impact assessment process, do everything we can to understand, mitigate that impact on the agricultural region. Beyond that, what we want to do is work, again, widely with others to look at what opportunities there may be for food and farming, which are linked or perhaps not linked to the reservoir. So we've engaged, we recognise we are not the people to be recommending what agricultural development should happen. We're a water company. But to try and help trigger some thinking, we've invested some money and commissioned Collinson Associates, who you may know are an agricultural consultancy and who know the region very well, to explore with us and others what opportunities there may be that we could perhaps build into the reservoir, but also what exists more widely. So we're asking them to do that piece of work, and we're funding that work as well. And we look forward to seeing what comes back later in the year from that as to how we can take forward some opportunities. That's one of the studies. There's a group called the Water Farming Reservoirs Group who've attracted some investment from Innovate UK to look at what they describe as a water bank pilot study, so looking at where water could be stored on agricultural land for agricultural purposes, but it could also provide environmental benefits. Maybe it could even provide some water quality benefits. So we've also going to provide some grant funding to support that piece of work to see again how that might develop alongside what we're doing. I probably won't get into too much detail about this. Master planning, that's looking at how we can develop that reservoir site to be a place which is great for nature and great for people. And in the stakeholder engagement, we're doing huge amounts of stakeholder engagement to make sure that it's not just our ideas going into this, it's others. So that's a whistle stop, actually, through that. I hope that wasn't too quick, but we haven't got much time.
Yeah, we can take questions.
Yeah.
So, whilst trying to identify and recognising that the multitude of opportunities that there are for the wider community, we certainly don't underestimate the impact that the proposals are having on those that are directly affected by the reservoir site and the wider infrastructure. So starting in September 2022, we went out well ahead of the public announcement to talk to landowners that are directly affected at that point, and have continued to do so on a number of different topics and different matters that have arisen in the intervening period. So Joe mentioned that surveys have been carried out, both non-intrusive environmental and other surveys, but ground investigations. So we've been in constant contact with the landowners affected to talk them through that process. Access has been taken by agreement, by negotiation with the landowners, and we're obviously very grateful to them for the cooperation through that process. In specific terms, it's recognised that where there are residential properties that sit within the footprint of the reservoir, there are circumstances where a situation of hardship could arise as a result of somebody not being able to sell their property and move on as a result of the proposals and the timescales involved with that. So we have, actually, can you move on to the next one? Thanks, Karen. No, that's fine. So we proposed a draft for the scheme. It's very much in line with proposals that have been put forward on other major infrastructure projects. It's a voluntary scheme. Legally, there isn't an obligation on Anglian Water to act in this scenario, but it's fully recognised that it's right and proper that we do so. So a draft was proposed. We engaged with directly affected parties and their advisors, as well as the local authorities concerned. We had some good and useful feedback from that process, which we've taken on board. We're actually just awaiting board approval on some amendments to those proposals, and the intention then is to launch the residential property support scheme when the public consultation starts shortly. And that would apply to the area within the indicative project boundary, so for those directly impacted. The way in which it would work is that if the circumstances were such that a property owner, a house owner, needed to sell their property, there would be a marketing process, and Anglian Water would either step in to purchase the property if a buyer couldn't be found. If a buyer could be found, if it was on a periphery, for instance, but only at a discount, then we would pay a top up to the valued full market figure. Yeah, thank you.
Just to round up, and so we've been speaking about the next phase of consultation. So basically, our plan is to start our second phase of consultation end of May. This is an informal consultation again. So our first phase was informal. This is an informal phase. Our formal legal consultation will take place in 2025. The purpose of this consultation is to give an update on the planning of the actual site, and also give an update on the location of the associated infrastructure. So there'll be a lot of information in that consultation. It'll sort of go back through all the work we've been doing over the last 12 to 18 months. There'll be a series of pre-consultation engagement. We'll be sharing with local authority officers next week our approach to consultation, which is a document that sets out how we're going to consult and gives an opportunity for the council to come back and comment on that. Then, before we go out to the public, we will go to our sort of key statutory stakeholders, and importantly, Hugh has a massive piece of work to go round all of the landowners that are impacted and give them an update prior to go out to the public. So that's a really key piece of work before we then launch at the end of May. It'll be similar to how we consulted last time, so we'll do digital approach, but also we'll go out and do face-to-face events across all the impacted communities. So that's the end of May, and then what happens at the end of that consultation is we take all of the feedback that we get from communities and statutory stakeholders, and then we go through that to enable it to inform our next stage of design, getting us ready to then do our final formal consultation in 2025, which takes me on to the high-level programme update, which you can't really read that well, but basically we'll do consultation now, 2024, we'll go into our formal legal consultation in 2025, aiming to submit the DCO in 2026. That will hopefully get signed off by the Secretary of State come 2028. I'm looking to start construction 2029. At CON1 we highlighted a date to be ready as 2040, but you'll have seen from a lot of the national news, particularly after the budget last week, about government's sort of push to ensure that water resilience is enabled across the country, and we've been asked to look to how we can accelerate that. So we've got the team working really hard to ensure that we can bring that date forward to 2040. We think we can have it in service by 2036. It's a massive ask, but we think that current programme that is our aim, and that will be the date that we're aiming to meet. So really tight timeline, but that is where we're looking at the moment. That's just saying a bit of the same things. I won't go to that. So we do have some time for questions, I hope. Yeah.
Thank you. That was very informative. Can I have a proposal for the report? Councillor Booth, thank you. Seconder? Thank you, Councillor Clark. Right, I now the item for discussion. Please raise your hands if you have any comments to make. Steve.
I've got a number of questions. I'll probably do two.
Yeah, that's fine.
Let it go. Otherwise, you get bored of my voice. So, one of the questions I've got is about the water table, the natural water table. Does this affect the water table in the surrounding environment at all? And the second question I've got is about the impact on carbon emissions, CO2. I'd imagine that from other reservoirs, you've probably done some work and you've got almost a standard figure for reservoirs, but it's quite unique here because of our peat soil that we're actually quite bad in terms of CO2. A lot of people are talking about re-wetting, so I don't know if you've done some work on that, whether it's a good thing, a bad thing, or a purely natural thing. So those two, please.
So in terms of impact on sort of water levels, I mean, I think it's, you know, you've said before in the meeting, you know, the sort of farming community there are, you know, specialists in terms of understand the land and also doing that water management side of it. From my perspective, you know, they're not just farmers, they are water managers. It's absolutely intrinsic. We're doing a lot of work at the moment to understand all the different connectivity between sort of mid-levels, the reservoir itself. I mean, the reason why we selected, you know, that specific site is due to the underlying materials, recognising, yes, there is some peat. When we looked at all of our, you know, sort of like preferred options, I suppose, at the time, they've all, unfortunately, you know, got some level of peat there. But in terms of the general material there is very competent, thick clay horizons, you know, underneath there, underneath what's called the Rodden or the Rodden beds, so to speak. So we'll be looking to, well, the reservoir will be hydraulically isolated itself. So it won't have, apart from the manual sort of pumping between the mid-levels and the pumping out of the water, there won't be an interaction between that and the surrounding water, other than, you know, potentially the transfer routes, which is, you know, what we're doing a lot of studies at the moment, both in terms of transfer of water, but also our integrated water management studies, which is looking at that sort of wider piece of how does all this fit together and potentially what the benefits here in terms of reducing pumping, maybe at St. Germans, and also, you know, sort of flood management benefits as well. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yeah, so if I just pursue on that one. So when you say it's isolated apart from where you're pumping, so there's some kind of a base in there. You're not relying on the natural clay to be the base.
So yes, we will be relying on the natural clay. So, you know, we're doing a huge amount of geotechnical investigation at the moment. So we're drilling down, we're proving where those clay horizons are. So what we're seeing at the moment is extremely below the superficials, so your overlying deposits, and you mentioned peat, there's also other materials in there as well. Below that, there's really, really thick lenses of clay, which is a very competent material. We've advanced observation wells, piezometers, to sort of measure water pressures and to, you know, look at the different sort of water horizons around the area. All the information shown to date is once we've actually got that foundation, so if you think about the embankments, we'll basically key into that sort of clay-based foundation. Once we have that, we will have a hydraulically isolated sort of unit.
I'm only a lay person, but that doesn't seem to make sense to me. We're suffering at the moment with all our roads being degraded in the area because they're on the clay and then peat, and with this, they're enlarging and decreasing because of drought, famine, etc. So there's moisture in the clay. Clay gets moist, clay dries out. If you're putting a few million tonnes worth of water on top of clay here, that's going to raise the water table everywhere else. If you're raising the water table everywhere else around here, we'll flood.
No. So I understand where you're coming from on that. The whole premise of the reservoir is we'll be making a very low permeability basin, and I mean extremely low permeability. You know, you're talking about the sort of base of the foundations, the walls to be somewhere near 200 metres wide, you know, engineered sort of clay materials. Again, that's why we're choosing this area, because the quality of clay is particularly good. It's extremely low permeability. Nothing's impermeable in real terms when it comes to, well, that's not true. Sorry, materials are impermeable, but you know, there's generally some sort of transfer between pools. But in terms of this reservoir area, you know, it's really thick deposits. You know, the permeability is so low, you're not going to get that transmissivity that you're talking about there.
Will there be some sort of evidence, scientific paper issue to allay people's fears? So there's kind of a guarantee there that people can check. So there'll be some kind of calculation. The permeability is this, so that other people check, because it's just, to me, I don't know if you compact it to reduce that permeability, but it seems to me if you're making a claim like that, you need to put it out where other people can check it, so that we don't worry about getting flooded.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the permeability or impermeability of the reservoir is going to be absolute paramount to any water storage. If it's not permeable, if it is permeable, then it's not going to form a very good sort of like water containment. So, you know, from our perspective, from an engineering perspective, we are absolutely going to categorically prove that that is the case. Everything we've seen today is saying it's all in line with our expectations. It's all in line with proven materials, proven methods for building these type of elements. So at the moment, we have every confidence that it's going to work. In terms of what you're suggesting there, absolutely. We need to prove categorically to who's going to build this, the sort of future systems to you know, how we're going to permit all of this, that we have that in hand. So that will be done on a technical basis. In terms, and we will be releasing, you know, evidence about how we're designing this, you know, through the DCO process to kind of say these are all the elements associated with this. This is all our thinking behind it. So yes, you know, we will be. I suppose it is quite a technical sort of subject area. You know, we'll do our best to make sure it is accessible, so it does give people confidence, because I think that's absolutely the right thing to do.
The second question is around carbon emissions, and the biggest hotspot on the carbon emissions is the construction of the reservoirs themselves, in terms of shifting quite a little bit of soil, the excavation, and the means by which we do that, and then also the pipes as well. The carbon, once we're in supply, is relatively small compared to that. It's the significant element is during the construction. That the carbon, those sources of carbons are relatively well understood. We can go and get models, and we've got our own models around that. The challenge is what you highlighted around peat, actually, is that science is pretty immature in terms of understanding the carbon emissions associated with a reservoir in operation as opposed to the agricultural land. That science is not great, and what we are doing is taking. We've got some expert consultancies, but we recognise we need more information to be able to quantify the impact in terms of the peat that is there. We need some better. We still need to develop the design a bit further so we can understand what we're doing. Then we can quantify the impact in terms of the carbon emissions by taking expert advice. So there's more work to do there. So, but you're absolutely right. That is a significant area that we've got to focus on in terms of any emissions associated with peat.
Yeah, Gavin.
You talked about the fact that you're going to have to sort of pump into the reservoir and then pump out of it. Are you exploring new technologies for pumping? Because on the IDBs I sit on, there is quite some concern. You know, we're supposed to be getting to net zero. Most of the pumps are the old diesel type. We've got like North Level, we've got a couple of electric pumps. But yeah, how do you run that? I think it's still quite a new area for development. And I don't think anyone across the country or across the world is really taking a lead on it, but it's a goal we've got to get to within 10 years. So, what's your approach going to be regarding, sustainable pumping, basically?
Yeah. So there's a lot I could say about this, but let me just try and narrow it down. So go quite narrow first of all. Our preference is for renewable energy. So clearly you want the most efficient pumps that you've got, first of all, so you use as little energy as possible. But if you can make sure you're using renewable energy, then that's your best opportunity to reduce your carbon emissions associated with your pumping. And that's why we are looking really seriously at what alternative renewables we could use instead of taking electricity off the grid. So we are considering whether solar can be integrated as part of the development of the reservoir. We're even considering whether wind can be integrated as part of the reservoir, because if you put those two together with battery storage, it gives you, it addresses the intermittency issue that you would get with one or t'other, and so that you can run your pumps on renewable energy for as much of the time as is possible. So that's one of the main things we're doing, is exploring that. albeit we recognise that the grid will decarbonise over the time, if you look at the trajectories as well. So that will help us get towards reduced carbon on energy.
I suppose to follow up on that, are you happy, confident that the pumps are going to be strong enough to deal with the volumes that you're going to need to move? Because I think it is still, new technology, fairly new technology, particularly electric pumps, trying to get them working. You've also got issues around, for example, what if the pump sites get flooded and stuff like that, so your resilience around that type of thing. So, I guess it's like, what's your confidence factor around making sure that, what you're going to use is going to be, be able to do the job you require it to do?
I mean, all really good questions, and I suppose the assurance I can give you at the moment is those are the questions we're asking ourselves as well, in terms of how we're looking at resilience, how we're looking at making sure that all these technologies are going to work. So, I suppose what I want to sort of point to at the moment, we are really early in the whole process. As I've talked about there, a lot of the work we've been doing is around siting the infrastructure, where are we going to put it, and trying to understand what the lie of the land is, what makes it tick, the key features of it, the people, etc., to make sure that whatever solution we're bringing in is the right one. There's a whole load of design elements that we're really just kicking off in anger now, to be fair, in terms of now we've cited this, now we know roughly where things are going to go. How do we now make it work? How are we going to move the water between the various different points? So there's still a lot of unanswered questions in that respect. But I suppose, as I said before, the key element is we're asking ourselves the same to make sure we've got resilience. We're thinking about carbon, we're thinking about energy. And all of these things, generally it's a win-win solution where, as an operator of these types of things, you want it to work when you want it to work, when it needs to work. It's essential. You want it to be low cost. You want it to be, in terms of the sort of ongoing operational costs, etc., and minimise the carbon as well. So,
and I think just to add to that, and something we're doing all this detail now to do our DCO, to go for our plan permission. But what we need to be careful of doing is not narrowing down our options too low now going into too tight now going into planning, because in a few years' time, that technology will have moved on so fast that we don't want to say, oh, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then close ourselves down for the opportunity for something that might come along, and then we can't take benefit of that. So an important thing when we go into DCO planning permission is to make sure we're giving ourselves enough flexibility to take advantage of any new technologies coming along.
Can I just offer one other point, and that, we do have reservoirs already which are pumping significant volumes like this, and we do manage the carbon and the resilience issues, I would say, relatively well already. So I think that's some confidence as well. If you're in terms of looking for confidence, is Grafham, Rutland, Pittsford, Alton Water pump significant volumes as well, and they've got renewable energy attached as well.
Councillor Marks, did you want to come in?
Thank you. I'd like to start this by saying I think this is a great project. I think for sort of like being a business person and being in the area, what this will bring in and enhance, I think will be great for the local area. However, that's 2036 by the looks of that. What about the here and now? We have got flooding issues that keep falling back to Anglian Water. What guarantees have I got when I stand in my village and say to people, yeah, Anglian Water on top of this, when they're building a £1 billion plus reservoir down the road, and we've got raw sewage going into farm dikes, onto farmland, and nothing gets done. I've got people who've had flooding issues. I had an 80-year-old stuck in a house with raw sewage. We had to have the fire brigade out because Anglian Water didn't turn up. And when they did turn up, they took one look and said, give us a call when it stops raining. So the good press that this has got has to be tempered by the bad press you've already got in the local areas, and we're not seeing any help from Anglian Water. So why going forward, what my concern is, what guarantees you're going to put in place when you put this big reservoir in, that we're not going to be even worse situation going forward with management and whatever.
I'll take that one. This is always going to be a challenge for us, obviously, as a project, a shiny new big major infrastructure project. We want to show these the goodness that can come out of this, but obviously not recognising that other parts of our operation, there may be some issues there. I know last time we came out to speak to the community, we brought along our regional engagement officer, Grant Tubbs, who came to your scrutiny committee and did a section on that to help out. And so whilst as a reservoir team we can't answer those details about your village specifically, we're very happy to take those comments away and we'll take them back to the relevant team. We know we've got a challenge at the moment with the public in respect of reputation. That's where we stand at the moment for water companies nationally, and we are working really hard with other teams across the organisation to make sure our customer standards are satisfactory. So that whilst our department isn't the one, and I know you can always say, oh yeah, well it's never yours, is it? We will certainly make sure that any issues that get addressed throughout our consultation with the community here are fed back to the relevant department and investigated, and we will do that.
If I can follow that up by Mr. Tufts was actually aware, and in the end we had to go to your CEO via our local MP, and within 4 hours we actually got some action. But up until that point, it was very sad to see an 80-year-old stuck there watching raw sewage going past her door. Following from that, you're talking about open drain policy for probably moving water. Local village again, we're about to lose, the likelihood is our local fire engine. We've got a build project which is going to have, I don't know how much construction work, which is less than 2 miles away. We have a major concern with that. And now you're talking about putting extra rivers and stuff in as well. Again, are you working with the local sort of like emergency services regarding this type of thing? Because at the minute, they didn't seem to really know what was going on.
I was going to cover the point. I mean, I think all these points, absolutely. We need to be taken on board regardless of whether we're a reservoir team or whatever else. And we need to be giving confidence to the communities round about that they can put their confidence and trust in us to do this. Now, I just wanted to touch the point just on the sort of water transfers element. Our view here is we're not intending on building new rivers or anything like that. It's really about trying to use the existing infrastructure. And, if you take something like the mid-levels, it's very much a bucket, really, of water. You take water from one point and it displaces across the rest of it. So there's no intention to see a massive sort of movements of water in that respect. It's really about utilising the existing resources and topping up where necessary on that sort of basis, I suppose. In terms of the emergency services, I'm going to revert to Karen on
So
that.
just to advise that as part of the DCO process, the emergency services are a statutory consultee, so we have to, they will get notified automatically about the project, but we will be engaging with those, that they need to be informed, and they will submit a response back to us. So that is normal that they'll be addressed and be consulted with. I think it's also worth just mentioning the amount of work that we are doing with the middle level commission. So because really that's a huge partnership that we have with them, and we're working hard, and they are giving us a lot of their time as well to help us. Ultimately we'll be relying on their system, and we're working hard with them to make sure we come up with a solution that suits them. So I know they're a trusted partner in the community, so hopefully that gives you some reassurance that we are fully integrated into the local level at that point.
Thanks, John. Steve, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, a useful point actually, because following on from Councillor Mark's opening comments about seeing this as a great asset for the future and fully supporting the comments that Councillor Clark's just made, I'm very much in a two-way situation, because I can see that this is a fantastic opportunity for the area, but I can also see that it could be a blot on the landscape and we could be sold a pup, so to speak. So how do we go through the process that Councillor Clark mentioned of making sure that we end up with the right reservoir, which we can all endorse, and that's where I'm coming from. So, for example, the question I had earlier about the water table, it's because I didn't know the answer, but somebody had raised that with me, and it would terrify me to think that they were right, and we end up flooding all our homes to deliver water elsewhere. So I'm just going to go on to the sort of things that will make it either good or bad, depending on how them. One of the things I noticed, I was one of the respondents in the earlier consultations as an individual. One of the things that concerns me is the opportunities this presents, because it's always an opportunity it presents. It doesn't say to me, Anglian Water will pay for, will fund, will sponsor a lot of these things. So we could have sailing, we could have some biodiversity, etc. There's opportunities by working with local farmers, local groups, local that. So what happens, is it a case of, yes, you have a lovely talking shop, but unless somebody else comes up with the money, you build your reservoir and that doesn't happen. And it's kind of saying to them, yes, we'd love you to have that as long as you can find the funding. Or does Anglian Water actually have a large sum of money that they can help with match funding, etc.? So I want to know what Anglian Water is doing to convert the opportunities into actual realities. The second one is about the landscaping. So we could end up with a very square, very high, very flat, boring structure in the middle of quite a plain landscape. So that I know that fed back into your consultation quite a lot. So what is Anglian Water going to do? Or is that an opportunity if somebody comes up with the difference in cost between your square banks and your nicely rounded banks with some ways of that? I'd like to understand what the potentials are for biodiversity. I take it that the processing comes after you remove the water from the reservoir, so therefore it can almost be used as a natural lake. You know, there'll be fish in there and birds and things. Or have I got that wrong? And it's kind of, we don't want those things in there. So I'd like to understand that a bit more. And I'd also like to understand, or perhaps you can explain, is Fenland District Council on this Future Fens Future Fens adaptation group? Because I had a quick look whilst we was talking, and I see that the origin started here, and I see that CPCA is a sponsor, but who's actually sitting at the table from FDC and getting involved in these kind of discussions? Thank you.
I can feel everyone wanting to touch the button and respond. So
lots of questions.
Lots of answers. So I'll just start and then I'll pass. With regards to, you know, what the opportunities, what is going to be there, there's lots of opportunity. We need to articulate that. As we mentioned before, it's early stages. Some of the key ways we're doing that is we're creating a socio-economic strategy amongst and a recreation strategy, several strategies to pick out what the opportunity could be for that place, and that will all be explained at phase 2 consultation. So we have some ideas of what it could be, and we will present those. Really, the process for enabling community voices to feed into what the final design is through these 2 consultation phases coming up. So the one that coming up this year and the one that comes up next year, where we'll present the design to you. At this phase, we're not going to be overly prescriptive because we want comments. You know, we've recorded some initial comments. We'll go to you with an emerging design, and we'll say, okay, this is what we think. Come forward and you know, give us your opinion, and we'll add that into our final design. So, you know, there's 2 years of ability to feed into that process and make sure we are delivering something that the area wants to see. We have been working with Fenland District Council local authority officers to take on the feedback that the wider community had, but also take on some feedback from some of their technical officers as well, to make sure that's all fed into our emerging design. There's things that the DCO will provide and can pay for, because that's required as part of the mitigation of having this reservoir in the site. There are some things we won't pay for because, as you say, it's customer payers, customer water bill payers that are going to pay for it, that we couldn't deliver as part of the DCO, but we would hope that by providing these things from the DCO, we enable other things. So, for example, if we need to build a road as part of the reservoir, the aim is we'd look to make sure that road is put in a place that maximises opportunity for further economic growth within that area. So these are the things that we're sort of going through at the moment. I'm going to pass to you.
Can I have a go?
And then to-
Again, you're right to pick up on us. We can sort of promise all things to all people and not deliver. So let me try and make it a bit more specific in a number of ways. So we are obliged, for example, as part of a public water supply company to provide recreational facilities to some extent on a reservoir like this that sits within the Water Industry Act. So those are not just opportunities which, if someone comes along, we will be obliged to incorporate some element of recreational facilities in the reservoir, and we will do that. So that's one example. Another example of what we will do is, if you think about, you talked about habitat development, for example, is that, again, we have an obligation through the biodiversity net gain obligations to deliver 10% biodiversity net gain. So we will be obliged to deliver, a nature habitat, which is great for nature, but also great for people as well. So that is a benefit that will be real, that will be there as well. Another benefit that will be real if we is that use of open channels, is that we will be moving water through the environment. Now that, talking to the wildlife trusts, just simply moving the water through the environment delivers environmental opportunities or benefits straight away. So it also may provide other potential opportunities which we may need to work with others, which we're exploring. I'm trying to think of a real example. Well, some open channels that we would like to use may be more expensive. So we will need to make a business case and possibly get partnership funding for some of those open channels. So that's an example where we will need to seek additional money because we couldn't get customers. So sorry, I was just trying to give you a few examples to say the short answer is both, is that we will be obliged to fund some of those opportunities, but also we will be looking for third-party funding to help us as well. Yeah.
And so just to add to that, so we recognise that the DCO, as part of the DCO, we have to pay for things. We have gone a step further in respect to Matt's overseeing a piece of work at the moment, saying, okay, we'll do a study to look at what all the opportunities that could happen, then we'll identify those that we know we would pay for as part of the DCO, but then Matt's instructed a further piece of work saying, okay, so this other stuff we can't fund as part of the DCO, but how could it be funded? So what are the pots of money, what are the institutions around that could potentially fund the other stuff? So although we can't pay for it, we have paid for a study to say, okay, well, where could that come from? Where could we then go on to get funding to deliver all of the other stuff? So hopefully that goes some way to make sure it's enabled.
I was really going to touch on the sort of impacts and benefits piece. So, you mentioned before we talk about the negatives, and it's good to talk about negatives. I think it's good that we get things out so we understand what they are, and then we can look at that mitigation to make sure we're minimising that impact as much as possible. But back on that sort of wider point, I see this as a really exciting project being involved in it. I see this as a potentially a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for regional scale, infrastructure, and talking about opportunities that can bring a lot of opportunities. So, my challenge to everyone is how you're engaging with that process to really sort of think about, what benefits could come out of this, for the sort of wider region. I think that's really important. So we're at that stage now. We're at that stage where we haven't gone into full-blown design, where we've just cited some of that infrastructure, so we know roughly where we are, but there's so many aspects that could integrate with that, given the sort of scale of what we're talking about here. So it's about, yes, we do need to identify the negative elements of it, what the impacts are from building it, issues that are in the surrounding area and how we sort of overcome those. But also, opportunities, where do we see sort of where do we see sort of local, economic regeneration? What opportunities are others going to have off the back of this? How does it support, the sort of regional flood management elements like this? So there's lots of opportunities, I think, that, could come out of this. It's about, being part of that, and supporting, it supporting this wider project to support you guys, you know.
Yeah, so if I go back to Councillor Clark's comments, you know, we should send a message of fully endorsing this. I'm not there yet, you see. So because what we had is we've got a list of opportunities, but we don't want to be overly prescriptive. They're at the next stage. We had some assurances you're obligated to fund certain things, 10% biodiversity. If I take an example, you may be obligated to provide circle paths on your area, all right? But will I get a cycle path from March to that area and your area to Chatteris from you or for somebody else before I give my support? Now, if I know either you and with or without partners, it's going to get done, then that moves me into the plus zone. If it stays that I'm going to get a reservoir with some nice paths around it, but actually I didn't get my bits that link it to the towns, I'm going to stay in the no camp. And that's, I think we need to get to the stage where we get told, once these opportunities are narrowed down, what's going to happen and what's not going to happen before I decide whether I'm fully supportive or not. Because it does have great opportunities. I'm for progressing towards that, but I don't want to put my hand up too early. If I may want to swap into the other camp and say, you're just dumping your stuff here because Fenland is easy. So I want to push you as hard as I can to get the most that I can for the local community.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, but I see Simon's got his hand up. Before I bring Simon in, we do actually have a walking, cycling and mobility strategy on, and one of the ones that I've been pushing on is from March to Chatteris. Whether we ever get it because of the cost, I don't know. Simon.
Yes, thanks, Vice Chair. I think to a certain extent, Councillor, you've answered your own question in terms of it's the stage we're at, and you know what's being presented is where we're at. Rest assured, colleagues, myself and other colleagues within the authority acting on your behalf are very closely working with team from Anglian Water, in fact a vast team of consultants and other people working on this project, and you know, frankly one of our, if not our key remit, is to make sure that those opportunities are well and truly exploited. And we do know there are things that are already being discussed on the table which we can't bring here today, but we know of them that are extremely exciting and we will make happen. My only my issue is in 2036, will I still be here for you to hold me to my feet to the coals? Hope we both are, to say you told me this and it's happened. So I hope that we're able to do that. But in all seriousness, that's exactly what we are doing. But it's at the stage that we're at that I appreciate doesn't answer all of the questions that you have. But rest assured, they will be and are being, you know, actively worked on, including, as has already been mentioned, I think Charlie Marks mentioned it, you know, the sort of construction phase, both here and at the close by South Holland Reservoir, which could potentially bring enormous benefit. It will bring challenges, absolutely, will bring a lot of challenges in terms of construction, but again, a lot of opportunities, and that's what we've got to make sure we exploit for local people, for local companies, as well as when the thing is built. So I think you've answered the question in that it's the kind of stage it's at, but we're on it, rest assured.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions I would like to answer, please. You say you're going out mid-June time to consultations. My understanding, you're not actually talking to farmers and telling them what's going on. They seem to be very vague at this time. So if that is the case, can you please start talking to the farmers, because you know they're pretty concerned. The other question, I know it's a long way down the road. Our roads are terrible. We've got problems with peat soil, etc., etc. Now, obviously, you're going to be carting in materials. Our roads cannot take the amount. So when the roads are damaged, will you be repairing them?
So as far as discussions with landowners, the challenge has been, I suppose, over the last 12 months, that there's a lot of work being going on in the background to progress the design and get to a point where we can brief them fully on where we've got to with all of that. We have had some interim meetings with the Land Engagement Forum through the landowners and their representatives, but I appreciate that up to now those have been, it's work in progress, but critically we are going out to talk to all of them in advance of the public consultation, so they will be fully briefed ahead of that and have the opportunity then to feed in formally and informally through that process.
And just to add to that, I mean, Ruth Oldfield and Hugh are our full-time consultants from Fisher German working to support landowners. So that is their job. They go out and speak to landowners on a daily basis, so that support mechanism is available to the landowners, and they are aware. But as Hugh said, we did set up a land engagement forum, a more formal forum to speak to landowners. We also do meet the NFU on a monthly basis to make sure we're keeping an update on the project. So we are very aware of our agricultural community, and we're very much open to any suggestions to how we can improve our communications. But I think we do a lot of work with them. We spend a lot of time speaking to our agricultural community. Just going on to traffic and transport and the roads, absolutely. We're not shying away from the fact that it's a huge construction project and there will be impacts on traffic and transport. As part of the environmental impact assessment, which Matt's team oversees, we creating a traffic and transport strategy to look at what are the best, most sustainable ways to get materials to and from site. But as part of the environmental statement, we are required to show what actually the impacts will be on roads, rails, etc., and how we will mitigate that. So we will have to do that as part of the DCO as a bare minimum.
Okay, thank you. Right, will you bring Gavin in, and then Mark, and then I think we're going to wrap that bit up.
Yeah, I just want to touch on the sort of other major projects. So you've got the Grantham to Bexwell pipeline that's ongoing at the moment through the district. From what you've said earlier, I take it there's no interconnectivity planned at this moment in time, but there could be that you will eventually link up. And I guess this is more sort of fundamental about the need for the reservoir, is the fact that you say we've got so many more houses coming and we need to sort of manage our water resources for the future. I was at a presentation, it was a number of years ago now, where I was told that there were plans to link up, I think, with Yorkshire Water and other sort of water suppliers, because I think people think we've got a national pipeline of water, which it doesn't happen. They're all contained units and they don't actually connect to one another. And there was talk about sort of trying to build a more national sort of pipeline. Has that progressed at all, and has that not progressed, and that's why we need to have the reservoir in Fenland?
Yeah. So the reservoirs are part of a strategic solution. So the strategic pipeline that is being laid, there will be interconnectivity in some way. So the water is going to be, that we're developing for these reservoirs, is to be used locally, but there is also an opportunity for good resilience reasons to be able to distribute it further afield as well. So it's an integrated solution. That was the first point. And in terms of a national grid of water, I mean, there's obvious constraints with that, as water is a lot heavier and therefore expensive to pump, and so not everyone necessarily appreciates that. I know you do, but there is a limit, to a limited extent, that does happen. So, for example, this project is being developed by Cambridge Water and Anglian Water, and that is to integrate the two supplies. So there is a level of integration where it is wise to do so.
Yeah, but there's still no national strategy in relation to that, by the sounds of it.
Well, these reservoirs have been developed as part of by our regulators, what's called strategic resource options, and so the water companies do work together to look at where strategic options are available. So if they are the best solution, they will be developed. But at the moment, the Lincolnshire Reservoir is for Anglian Water, and the Fens Reservoir would be for just Cambridge and Anglian. Beyond that, it wouldn't make good sense.
That. I mean, the other thing that hasn't really been mentioned is like the Environment Agency, things like extraction licenses, the whole plethora of legislation. I mean, there's even a Reservoir Act, isn't there? Not my brief time when I was on the middle level. So there's so much legislation that you have to go through. I mean, I assume that's why it's going to take so long, because this country, unfortunately, we can't get on and do a project. We have to talk about it for 10 years before getting a spade in the ground. So.
Yes, so we've got to secure abstraction licenses, so we've got to work closely, and we are working closely with the Environment Agency to make sure the water is there and we can take it without derogating rights to anybody else. And so we've got a programme of work to agree those abstraction licences with the Environment Agency, and we're progressing through that. Otherwise we'll build a reservoir and not have any water to fill it with, so we'll be making sure we nail that. Yes, and I mean that's what Joe was emphasising. These are sort of winter fill reservoirs, is that we are recognising that, you know, the changing climate is driving more intense rainfall in the winter, and then there's water scarcity in the summer, and so these reservoirs help to address that challenge.
Very much as a sort of balancing agent. I mean, hopefully I was going to say that, you know, on the back of the fact there's lots of legislative hurdles to get through, it should give a lot of confidence in terms of what we're building, how we're building it, to make sure it is safe, and, you know, it's being fair to those around as well.
Thank you. Councillor Marks, you're going to be the last question.
Thank you. Heard everything you've said. Great. I'm still so far in support. As I say, I think Councillor Count was, you know, he's probably erring on the side of caution, which probably we all should. However, we're in a situation at the present time where we have a number of farmers and a number of businesses that are still working with very much an unknown from yourselves, because you're telling us all of this, but they're now unsure. I know family farms where the son's coming through the business, you know, do we farm what we're farming now? Do we go off and look at other land? I was talking to a landowner the other day who turned around and said, I don't know what my son will do, because if my land gets swallowed up with this, but we're probably another 3 to 4 years before we have that. The other problem we have around here is also the cost of land is now everybody who's outside this sort of like line you've put round is putting their land price up, because they're all rubbing their hands knowing the other local farmers are going to have to try and buy some land from somewhere. But the follow-on from that really is, one, when are we going to get a date that yes, this is happening? No, we're not. No, it's not. And number two, I come back to what I said previously. We still have a village that's in turmoil because we're not getting the infrastructure and money spent on that. So where are your shareholders suddenly going to come up with £1 billion for this, but not actually looking after the infrastructure they've already got?
So, fully accept the uncertainty of the current state that we're in at this point. Obviously, the project's being progressed. We don't necessarily know which land we need and which we don't need yet. There will be a further design freeze that's proposed for December end of this year, and at that point we'll be in a position to go out and negotiate agreements with landowners to acquire the land and rights that we need from that point. So typically those would be option agreements that would provide some upfront funding, and then the actual acquisition would take place once the consent has been granted for the reservoir. There are lots of discussions ongoing to understand as much as possible with those particular farmers about their businesses, about the impact, and we will do what we can do to be able to assist in those situations.
Okay, that sort of answers the question, but we still don't have a date in the calendar.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, when we've done our next design freeze, so we'll go through phase 2 consultation, we'll review the design, and once that design freeze has taken place, then we'll be in a position to start negotiating land. So we're not talking years off. To be able to submit the DCO in 2026, we want to have negotiated land with landowners before we go to the 2026 submission with the planning inspector, because we want to do this by negotiation. We don't want to do it by compulsory acquisition. And actually, it puts us in a stronger place and a stronger position from a DCO perspective if we've negotiated all that up front. So it's in our interest to do this as soon as possible so that we have a speedier DCO process.
Thank you. And regarding funding?
Regarding, is it Mainey? So funding, well, obviously
I have to say the Fenland area is flooding. It's not just Mainey, it is the Fenland area.
So with regards to issues in Mainey, I will go back to the point I raised about speaking to Grant, and I'll check that those issues have been dealt with, so I'll make a note and take an action for that. You can add anything to that?
Yeah, I could talk sort of very briefly. I mean, in terms of actually funding the reservoir, this is not something that Anglian Water's going to do in terms of the sort of capital cost for it. So that's something I think we need to be aware of. So when we're talking about stumping up billions of pounds, you know, Anglian Water can't do that. You know, this is such a massive project that we're looking at that we need to get external support to actually provide that funding to build, you know, something so large. This is a common, you know, approach taken in the UK for, you know, a large majority of infrastructure schemes. You know, you've probably heard about power stations, how they get funded and issues with those. You know, various different road schemes quite often have tolls or whatever on it. I was involved with the Mersey Gateway Bridge, very much an external sort of funder associated with that. Thames Tideway, again, sort of external funding coming into support. So we're actually looking to use a similar model as Thames Tideway did in the sort of construction of the sewers, where we get external funders coming in to do this. So, you know, our part in this is very much looking at the sort of planning, it's thinking about the strategic, what the needs are, how we actually meet those needs, and set up, essentially, everything that's required to make sure that when, you know, for the delivery of this project, when a financier comes in, we've got everything right. You know, we've got that community engagement, we've got, you know, the right sort of solution in terms of what we're doing. So it's about us doing that sort of, making sure that that solution is the right solution to then, you know, have that enshrined within the DCO, the actual development consent order, then that gets passed on. So it's critical for us to get that DCO right, to make sure, you know, what we say is going to be delivered will be delivered, you know, by that downstream financier. Does that help on that, just in terms of the sort of funding element?
It does to a certain point, but obviously, you know, it is funding. This has got to be paid back at the end of the day. So are the people who give you the loan going to be looking for money more back? And obviously the infrastructure around it falls down more because you're paying now for a reservoir which is in Fenland, but Fenland are going to lose. That's my concern.
Okay, I mean, I think, you know, fair enough, and I could see how concerns would come about like that. I mean, the whole model of how this should work, it should mean that actually it's equitable, you know, for all the different generations. So it's not this generation paying for everything and, you know, the next generation sort of benefiting completely. You know, it's spreading that load along across the sort of board. So, you know, it's difficult trying to get such a major piece of infrastructure constructed, huge amount of cost, and it's all about, you know, ensuring that there's a set rate, you know, minimal sort of additions to people's water bills basically to pay for this for many years. But that's built into the contract, you know, with that operator.
Thank you. There are no further speakers. Therefore, the recommendation is for the Rural and Farmer Committee to note the latest update from Anglia Water. Please, can you raise your hand if you disagree with the report recommendations? Councillor Booth.
Yeah, I think given what's been said here today, I would like a recommendation that we invite the project team back on a regular basis to ensure that we get regular updates and that we can help shape how this project develops and how it can benefit the residents of Fenland.
Thank you. Yeah, I did discuss that with officers and the chairman prior to this meeting today. So I'm sure that we will invite you back. So I would say thank you very much for your time. It's been very informative. We've still got a long road to go, but thank you. Gentlemen, do you want to have a 5-minute break?
I'll go and ask.
It'll be good if you take Ian, if you want. We'll see how that goes, shall we? Sorry, you're next.
Right, after that little breather, folks, so item number 8 on the agenda is the Rural and Prosperity Fund. So I now call upon Simon Jackson and Dawn Kaplan to introduce the report. So can I have a proposer for the report, please?
Yeah.
Put in the first. Sorry, ignore that bit. Simon and Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. And if I ever come forward again and ask for the Anglian Water item to be taken before ours again, please ignore me. So, although I thought it was a very good debate, and I thought the questions that members asked were genuinely very, very pertinent and very, very good. So it was a good event. Stop rambling. So Rural England Prosperity Fund, just a quick overview. You've hopefully had a chance to see the report. We mentioned at the kind of unofficial first meeting of the committee that this funding was around for the rural community, and that basically means everywhere apart from Wisbech, and that we'd been allocated as a district 436,000 over a 2-year period. We're coming to the end of the first year period. Cabinet decided that the funding for this current year should all be invested in supporting businesses. You've got 2 options with this funding. One is to support local businesses, the other one is to support what they call community in place. So Cabinet decided, given the amount of money that's available, which is a lot of money but then isn't, that we would invest it in supporting local businesses, and that's what my colleague Dawn Kaplan has been working fantastically hard, doing a great job on doing in this current year. And you'll see in the report that we've supported some 16 businesses, I wish it was 16,000, 16 businesses, and allocated around £80,000 worth of this year's grant funding. The remainder will be carried over into the 24-25 financial year. You'll see there a couple of the businesses that we've supported and some of the comments that they've made. And then we've set out a very similar programme in terms of support for business in 24-25, and again you'll see what that entails in terms of giving grants out again to businesses, and they're a process that they go through. Following your feedback at this meeting last year, we decided we were giving a maximum of £5,000 per business, but based on your recommendation and feedback, we increased that to £10,000, and we also reduced the eligibility criteria in terms of employees. We did have 3, and again, based on your very helpful suggestion, husband and wife teams and that sort of thing, we reduced that to 2. So we have Dawn has literally, with our comms team, commenced the marketing for the rural programme for this year. This year's programme, the funding available is being split between supporting local businesses and community in place equally. So there's some £163,500 supporting local businesses and £163,500 supporting community in place. The community in place element is led by our colleague Phil Hughes. It is Hughes, isn't it? Yeah, Phil Hughes. And you'll see again in the report, there are 3 projects that have been approved by Cabinet that come under this community and place. Some around enabling better use of green spaces in Furrowfields and Chatteris and in Whittlesea. And a 3rd project, which is kind of referred to as men's sheds. I'm sure ladies are equally welcome, I would hope. And that's in Station Road and 2 chapel buildings at Cemetery Chapel in March. And again, there is an existing version of that, I think, in Wisbech. Yes, there is. And so this will provide this additional facility, but in March, and that's attracting £113,000 of the 163. The remainder is split between enabling better use of green spaces. So that's the programme that we've launched in terms of grants for businesses, and the 3 community projects will kick off at the start of the next financial year. But we wanted to make sure that members were up to speed with what was happening, and this is a rural grant programme. There are other grant programmes that are also underway. We have a programme to existing businesses, which again comes under this shared prosperity funding. And again, Dawn's leading on that, and we've currently got about 100 plus expressions of interest for funding for next year from that. We've also got a programme where we're providing grant funding, wherever you are, grant funding for anybody who wants to start a business or anybody who's just commenced a business. And we're also putting some money into a programme of support for younger people aged 18 to 25, thanks Dawn, 25, around entrepreneurship, how to start a business. If they've started a business, can we help them to keep it going and expand it, and those sorts of things. So all around the kind of skills and experiences that you need to be able to run a business successfully. So we've got that. That's the sort of main programme that we're running in the next financial year. But we wanted to bring this back to this committee, as I say, particularly the rural one, because, as the name suggests, it's a rural grant fund. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Simon. So can I have a proposer for the report, please? And a seconder? Charlie, thank you. So I'll now open the item for discussion. So please raise your hand if you have any queries on it.
Yeah, I'm just, so first of all, I'm in total agreement with the funds, the purposes, etc. Nice to see them going to good use. A little bit concerned about the narrative about the men's shed. I understand there's a men's shed at the FACT offices, and it sort of indicates that there isn't any in Penland apart from Wisbech. So are we duplicating efforts? Have we missed that somehow? Is it a different type of men's shed?
Apologies, Council, I'll have to take that away.
Yeah.
As it's, if I could answer it, I'd answer it, but I don't know necessarily unless other colleagues around the table do.
Could I ask you to take it away?
Yes.
And to check this out with Councillor Gary Christie.
Yes.
Who's, because it's on the FACT site, and I'm pretty certain, I've just had a quick Google, and there's something going on there. So I don't know if they're different.
You just give me the name of the place again.
Gary Christie.
Yes, the place.
FACT.
Yeah. I will follow it up, and we'll give you an answer to that. Apologies, I can't do it today.
Simon, can I ask you, I didn't quite hear, which is the other company in or location in March for the men's shed?
Yes, so it's listed here as unused space on Station Road, Cemetery Chapel, March. Which I believe is, yeah. But later on it talks about to renovate the inside of the two chapel buildings that have recently been repaired externally.
Yeah, it is a disused building, but there is, I can answer the question, there is a men's shed at FACT. I think they run on a Wednesday and a Saturday, and it is open to women. It's not just, there's quite a few women go there. And I think there might be a conflict here if we're going to have two. You know, they've already been funded, and I think they were looking for more funding to have a larger building, actually a larger shed. So I think we've got to be careful that we haven't got them all over the place, because this is something that was started off in 2021 when Councillor Count was the leader at Cambridge County Council. That's where the original shed started. It actually started in Australia, but it was the success of Ramsey, and you know there has been quite a lot of funding for that. I don't grudge them any money. They can do something with the building, great, but I don't think we should be duplicating.
Thank you. On these grants, is regarding apprenticeships, is that something that you're pushing? I mean, there is a lot of youngsters, you're saying 18 to 25 who are starting their businesses. I can't think of too many, but I know there's an awful lot of people around here, businesses that are looking for apprentices, and also there are people looking for apprenticeships. The problem is, it's a bit like Metalcraft at Chatteris, that they can't get to there. Is there help and assistance you're giving to those as well?
Yes, there is. That element that I mentioned is funded through this programme, but there is a wider programme of support for skills, apprenticeships, etc. And indeed, the Cabinet made a decision with this shared prosperity funding to provide a top slice of it to the CPCA, as have done the other local authorities, to put into an area-wide skills programme which would include apprenticeships, internships and so on. So what we're being very careful of is this our programme, which is much smaller than that, adds value to what is already planned and happening. So the CPCA, as others, the colleges, etc., are already doing a lot of work on that. This piece sort of adds into that. Does that answer it, Charlie? Kind of.
It does. The thing about it is it made public? Because a lot of businesses I go into are saying to me apprenticeships, stuff like that, and then we have money sitting there, or as you say, that has been taken off the top. But I think a lot of these businesses, be it engineering, be it agriculture or whatever, are not knowing that there is this available. And it's something that I think Fenland should be pushing.
Absolutely, and CPCA are kind of mindful of that. I mean, members may be aware of the very extensively funded programme called Growth Works, which the CPCA put £30 million into over a 3-year period, and part of that was Growth Works skills. Now, how successful that was, thanks, it's not been fully evaluated, but to the extent that CPCA have not renewed that contract and are now putting their own in-house, as it were, programme in place, which involves business support and skills support, and they're still kind of getting the getting the act together to deliver that. What I would say is that we have, and as I think we said last time, we built up from scratch a very extensive database of businesses, and that's our main, as an economic growth team, that's our main mechanism for communicating directly with businesses. We've got something like 2,500 on it at the moment. And we're about to procure a customer relationship management system, which will help us to improve that communication even further. So, you know, it's not perfect, but we do send out, and we get lots of opens, actually. We get a very high open rate, a regular kind of newsletter with information about what we're doing, but importantly, what other stakeholders and what other partners are doing, including around things like skills. So part of our role is to make sure more people open that email and have a look at it. I know you're a big fan of email. You know, it's, but that is one of our key ways, as well as publicity. So there will always be people that we haven't reached, Councillor Marks, but part of our role, and we know we do, is to reach way more than we did last year, and we'll reach way more people in the next year. So it's not perfect, but you know, we're doing the best we can.
I was going to say, we do actually, when we go out, we do connect with a lot of businesses, and we find that some of the business really are looking for apprenticeships, but we're also a bit wary because we want to make sure they're just not somebody that's out there giving them sort of like cheap labour. We want to make sure that there's a proper programme in place, and we're connecting the right people to the right apprenticeships to the right businesses. So I've had lots of businesses ask me, you know, what are the opportunities? So we are very much got our ear to the ground, and anything that we can find out, we are supporting them, not just with grants, but going the extra mile to help them support their business, you know, and get these young people qualified and in work, you know.
I think just to add to that, Councillor Marks, there's a few of us here who've had great experience of giving out grants, particularly in the COVID years. And one of the sources we relied on was councillors giving us names of things that perhaps we haven't looked at or are not on our database. So you mentioned you had contact and some of the businesses talk to you, but if you give us names, we undoubtedly can set up a dialogue with those people. And as we did throughout the COVID years, we were given names, and we went in, and if they weren't eligible for these particular grants, there's other funding that's available. So that's a big part of what Simon and his team do.
In fairness to Councillor Marks, he's our biggest provider of names of companies to go and visit. So he's our main salesperson. Yeah.
Simon, may I ask about the grants and things? this is from personal experience regarding, since the reservoir was mentioned, the bank have basically pulled all our financial funding from us each year through the business. The minute we're classed as high risk, because they don't know of what length of time they're talking, or Anglian Water's talking before they come to us. So all our business finance was being pulled from us straight away. Are you looking at that area where that reservoir is? Can people in there actually apply for grants still? Or would you look at them the same way as potential high risk because you don't know how long they're going to be in that area for?
Funding ends, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this funding that we're referring to, the rural and the wider the Shared Prosperity Fund, ends in March 25. So, you know, that wouldn't affect, in terms of what we were looking at, that wouldn't necessarily affect, you know, somebody that put a grant and we say, oh, hang on, they're going to be a reservoir in 20 odd years time or whatever it is. So at the moment, no, that wouldn't by default put anybody, you know, out of the reckoning for a grant from us, for sure. But then, you know, we will wait to see. I mean, at some point there'll be an election, you know, if it's the same government or a change in government, or however that pans out, you know, there will be more grant opportunities that will come along. As we get closer to the 2036, I suppose, well, in fact, it will have happened, won't it? Because they'll have been building it for 10 years. So we'll know what the situation is. But as we sit here now, no, it wouldn't.
Lots of trusts and foundations out there that I would be recommending to Anglian Water to actually apply to. There's a directive of social change where they could absolutely, once they've got everything together, the whole thing's packaged and looked at the opportunities, I'm sure that there will be a lot of funding out there for this type of project. It's just about knowing how to access it. Yeah. Which one do I suppose?
Yeah, in your press release that you put out on the 5th, it says businesses have until 5 p.m. on Saturday, April the 6th to lodge an expression of interest. What happens after that date? Has it finished or?
So, not necessarily. So we've got this £163,500 worth of funding. We get these expressions of interest. We very carefully assess those, and what normally occurs is that we have requests for way in excess of the 163. So then we carefully assess them and give every expression of interest a score, and then we work out where the 163 line is. And provided that if in this instance all of the schemes that are in are of a very high quality, very good quality, then that might be the end of it in terms of rural funding for the next financial year. However, if we don't have sufficient, or if there aren't sufficient of a decent quality, then we open it up again. So we'll reopen it. One of the things that we're very cute on is, and having been in this rodeo a few times, is when you have money with an end date, is you have to make sure that you've got a very fast start. So what Dawn's done is to get expressions of interest, etc., and the marketing all in place way before, in fact we started just before Christmas, to make sure that by the time we start the financial year, in theory, within a matter of weeks, we could be paying money out. So we don't get to a point where, towards the end of the year, where we've still got a lot of money left to give out, and we start to panic a little bit. So we are front loading it for that reason. However, we won't just give the money out. There will have to be good plans in place, good quality applications. They must press, because what we have to provide back to government via CPCA are clear outcomes and objectives that they're looking for, like job creation, like more exports, like diversification, all those sorts of things. So we have to make sure that the people that are applying to us are also pressing some of those buttons.
Could I just say that if you do have any contacts, I know, Chairman, that you do in terms of, a lot of farmers, just if I can send you some information, get it out to them, because we really are sort of focusing on farmers and farm diversification and tourism. And also I've got a meeting with NFU on Friday to see whether or not we can get some information out to their members as well, so that we can actually really be strategically targeted in the areas that we need to be in, and we get the results that we need. Okay.
Simon, can I ask you, is any of this fund available for the shop owners or businesses in March Town Centre, Broad Street, with regard to all the redevelopment, which they're struggling quite badly?
In theory, Councillor French, there's nothing to stop them because they're within the geography. However, the way the scheme is designed, and part of that, in fact, most of that is to do with what the government wants for this money, it's unlikely that that type of business would deliver the sorts of outcomes that the government want to be delivered, and therefore we wouldn't put them off because, you know, you never know what a shop owner might come forward with. It might be more than the shop. It might be something spectacular. You know, so for example, as you'll know, dentist. Well, you might think, well, you know, how's a dentist going to push some of the buttons for government? Well, dentist says, I want to create a training situation where I can train people. That was the plan.
And they got the money.
Correct. You know, so so in other words, you know, if you just said the dentist, they've gone, oh, actually, probably won't. But actually, when you get the application in or you get the expression in, you then realise, actually, this could push a lot of buttons. So that's why I say don't put them off. But if it's like a corner shop or a sandwich shop, it's probably highly unlikely because they're going to be competing against other applicants that are going to just score way more heavily, I would suggest. But we definitely don't put people off.
All right, thanks for that.
Yeah, I know what the report says about what you're doing, particularly for the businesses. My concern, I suspect Simon won't be able to answer this question, is more about section 2.6 and the community place funding applications. This is a rural England grant process, and where are the free grants in Fendon going? Into the towns, they're not going into the rural villages. I think we've completely missed the mark here. I'm quite disappointed with this. I raise this every time we have a business plan about there's not enough being done for the villages, because when you look at the business plan, all the big projects are around what's happening in the towns. There's very little specifically aimed at supporting the villages. And this, it almost seems to me like it's like a shopping list for things that Fenland's involved with, where they want to sort of, you know, help themselves out. It doesn't look like they've gone out to the rural communities to find out what actually they want, and to the villages. So while I support the business aspirations, I certainly don't support what they're proposing under 2.6 for the community place, because it's not supporting the rural area of Fenland. It's only supporting the towns. And sorry, but you know, they get a lot of support as it is. So.
Yeah, I got my impression was this was led by bids, by people coming forward with what they want. So I think it's a case then of letting our rural communities know and getting the bids in. It isn't a case of the FDC have allocated this because they've got favouritism of towns. It's because the rural bids haven't come in with a stronger bid. So if you represent a rural community, which I know you do, Gavin, then get the message out to them as to the sort of thing that they could put forward.
But on that basis, we've not managed to get the message out to the rural areas, and I think we've got to try again, to be honest, because I think we're failing to deliver on that half of the fund.
Can I say something? I find that a lot of the the grants that the rural communities would want in terms of community places to do up their village halls, and it's just way too much. We just don't have that kind of money. So I think that's one of the issues that I think they would come across, wouldn't you? I mean
that is an issue. There's £163,000. It's a lot of money, but it isn't. And if this programme is in effect a replacement for or follow on to what was a European funded programme called LEADER. Now, without making any political comment whatsoever, there was far more money in the pot for LEADER and I know because I ran one of those or was a chair of the committee that looked after the programme down in Essex, and we were handing out grants of 300,000, you know, $250,000 for farmers who wanted a plough or whatever it is, you know, and so just way more money was available to do stuff with. So that's a kind of a reality. It's not undermining the point you make, 'cause I think it's a very good point. I'll make a note of it. The other thing, of course, is that the rural fund defines what they mean by rural, and for Fenland that does mean everywhere apart from Wisbech. So, you know, technically, I accept your point. I'm not arguing against it, but technically, you know, the towns apart from Wisbech are rural towns, notwithstanding the point you make, and I'll take that point back.
So please raise your hands if you disagree with the report recommendations. Otherwise, I will take it all that you agree.
Well, Chair, I think the recommendation is just to note the report, but I mean, based on my comments there, that, you know, I think we need to ask the Cabinet to relook at the funding for the community place, particularly for the rural areas.
Yeah, Chairman, I understand what Councillor Booth is saying, but my understanding, and I've seen there has been repeated press releases about this, and I think that's where some of the applications are actually coming in. So I don't think it's a case that Cabinet have missed out the rules, because obviously we want the rules to apply, but we can't force them to apply.
I think it'd be worth checking, somebody here might know the answer, but surely all the parish councils would have had the communication go to them as well. They would have. So I'm just thinking of events like Parson Drove, which is close to you, Gavin. They have that big motorbike classic car show once a year. If they needed something like the electrical systems that the Straw Bear was successful as, and they would have put in a similar bid, then my expectation would be that they would have got a similar thing. So I'm not sure why it is that they either didn't see that, they missed that, but it's gone to the parish council, it's gone in the press releases, and you can only knock on a door so many times. I don't think the district council's at fault for not having got the reactions from the parish councils. Perhaps if you want to take that up and see if they noticed it or didn't have any projects worth doing, except for the village halls, which are not eligible.
I think when it's sent out to parish councils, it's just sent as a press release. It's not like we're inviting you for organisations to come forward. With regards to the car show, I have to say I'm on the committee of that. Yeah. So with regards to us, we're a fundraising committee. So what we're trying to do is raise funds for local causes and Air Ambulance and Magpas. So I think if we'd seen that, it's like, well, yeah, this probably isn't going to apply for us because we're fundraising, we're a charity organisation, so we're not going to fit the criteria. But, for example, there are other community groups within the villages that probably could have applied to it, and they probably haven't picked up on it, and that's the point I'm making. So although, yeah, a press release goes out, it's a general press release, I think it's almost goes back to this point around, you know, contact with businesses, isn't it? It's the same type of issue that people don't realise that it's actually open for them. And that's why I'm concerned. Also, the parish councils, yeah, we might see the press release, but it comes across quite bland. It's not like we're asking for your help to get the rural groups to apply for this funding.
I think the press releases were very much, can you put applications in for funding? There's no difference between, you know, we don't say, could March Town apply for funding? They're saying, if you're reading this, there's a bid at the bottom, please apply for funding. However, on a more constructive note, it does occur to me that you've got the business register which you've developed. It might be useful if we went out to all the parish and town councils and said, you know, is there supplementary groups that may be eligible for things, community groups, etc., that you have a list of, you wish supplies, and then we could do, an email doesn't cost anything as a circular, so if we can get those lists going, particularly the rural ones which are more hard to communicate with, it'd be useful.
Certainly from the economic growth team perspective, our database also includes the parish clerks, etc. So we do message directly to them our newsletter about what's available and so on and so forth. So because we're very mindful of that, you know, and you know, I wasn't joking when, you know, we're very happy for any elected member who you know your patch, you know, to say, oh, could you go and speak to so-and-so, and we'll do that very quickly and very efficiently. So, you know, we will use all communication channels that are available. Of course, having a big team of members is a very important one.
On to item number 10, so the climate impact assessment given to us by Rob Wise from the NFU.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation to come and address the committee. Let me introduce myself. So I'm Rob Wise. I'm the NFU's East Region Environment and Land Use Advisor, and come from a arable farming background on the Suffolk-Essex borders, but been with the NFU now for 11 years. And was invited to come and talk to you about climate change mitigation. Obviously, as an environment and land use advisor, that's one of the issues that falls within my remit. I also look after monitoring what's going on with environmental land management schemes, flooding issues, water quality issues, etc. I have a colleague covering water resources issues, so I'm somewhat peripheral to the discussions that you were having before about the Anglian Water Reservoir, but I will weave in a couple of comments related to that in the context of what I come to address you about. So the NFU has over 600 members in Cambridgeshire. The face of the NFU, beyond myself as an environment and land use advisor in Cambridgeshire, is through a county advisor. We have a fairly new Cambridgeshire county advisor called Rory Kerr in place, and then our membership are looked after via a network of branches who are administered by the NFU Mutual insurance agents who act as group secretaries to those branches. But certainly from the NFU's point of view, we have always recognised the sort of unique place that the Fens plays in British agriculture, which is why we put out a report a couple of years ago, which I would hope that some of you may have seen, called Delivering for Britain, Food and Farming in the Fens, emphasising the high value root, salad and vegetable cropping that goes on in this part of the world, and its contribution to the national economy. The farming element of that across the Fens is worth over £1.25 billion, and the whole food supply chain value coming out of the Fens is over £3 billion and supports over 80,000 jobs. So I don't need to tell you all of that, but I think it's important context to remind a wider audience about why farming in the Fens is so important, not just for the individual businesses that make their living from it, but its contribution to the national picture. So when it comes to climate change, we have a sort of double-edged sword in operation in Fenland because of the peat. The peat creates the ideal growing environment for those high-value crops, which is the positive. The downside is working that soil creates very large greenhouse gas emissions compared to mineral soils. And so we found in recent times that there's been increasing political scrutiny on the efficacy of producing that high-value cropping in the fens because of the carbon footprint that results from it. That said, the NFU at a national level has recognised that farming, while being part of the problem of climate change, is also part of the solution, because we can actually sequester carbon on land, and we can do it on behalf of the industry as a whole, but we can do it on behalf of others as well, in terms of offsetting their emissions in carbon trading, which is a market that is gradually developing. So the NFU a few years ago set an ambition that the farming industry in England and Wales should become carbon neutral by 2040. That is a national goal. It's not a farm business level goal. It's not a regional goal. It's a national goal, because we recognise, as I've just said, that certain areas are inherently more carbon emitting, and the peat is one of those areas. So it's not to say that every farm business in Fenland ought to have as a goal being carbon neutral by 2040, because it's clearly impractical to think that that is a heterogeneously achievable objective. That said, if we think about the Fenland context and the fact that people are pointing fingers at farmers in this area and saying, we've got to stop these emissions. For example, a group of postgraduate students at Cambridge published a report a couple of years ago that said fully 35% of all Cambridge's carbon emissions came from peatlands. Now, that made everybody sit up, and it made us in the NFU go along to the people that do the calculations on this and say, is that figure right? And I think the short answer is no, it wasn't. It was a bad desktop study. And so we've been spending quite a lot of time since then trying to make sure that we have the right data to support the decisions that people want to take, either in terms of policy decisions that might affect farming businesses, but also that individual farmers know what their own impact on the environment is and can make their own decisions about what to do about that. So that disputed data surfaced around the time the Combined Authority had put their Climate Commission into place. And one of the results was that the chapter that John Shropshire, as a climate commissioner, asked to be responsible for looking at agriculture and peat did, was gather people together who understood the figures to think about where we go from here. And the agriculture and peat chapter in that original CPCA climate change report said that the farming community should and would take more responsibility for thinking about climate mitigation. And so one of the results of that was persuading the CPCA to put some money into the creation of a farmer-led group, Fenland Soil, which some of you may be familiar with, that is farmer-led, farmer-run, and is trying to gather better data on what peat is left, where it is, and how much it is emitting. One of the results of that has been the creation of a methodology for doing mapping of individual farmers' soils. Because the last time it was systematically done physically by taking cores across the landscape was in the 1980s. And so that's one of the reasons the data that came out a few years ago saying there's a catastrophe happening here was so wrong, is because it was assuming that there was a lot more peat around than there actually is. So you can cast aspersions as to what happened in the 40 years in between in terms of the disappearance of that peat and where the carbon from that went. But in terms of where we are today and where we need to go, we need accurate mapping and then some thinking around what the options are for mitigating carbon emissions. Now, from an NFU point of view, and any farmer that I've talked to that's been involved in Fenland soil, NFU member or otherwise, we all start from the same point that delivering for Britain, as our report said, remains important for the Fens. And so this is all has to start from a perspective of food security and farm profitability. I'm sure you all heard the expression before, you know, you can't farm green if you're in the red. You have to be in the black to do the right thing for the environment, whether it's carbon mitigation or for biodiversity. So I work very closely with Fenland Soil. We have so far been able to map about 15% of the Fens as a whole, probably 25% of Cambridgeshire, and we've been getting additional grant funding from DEFRA to roll that out further from a number of places. And when those farmers have those maps of showing exactly what they've got on their farms and then think about that in terms of their cropping rotations, they can start to make decisions about changing practices to mitigate carbon emissions. In terms of the NFU strategy on getting to carbon neutrality across the industry as a whole by 2040, we've sort of identified that about 25% of those reductions will come through increases in farm productivity. So that's not necessarily to do with the soil emitting carbon, that's to do with having more efficient machinery, fewer land passes, etc. So you're burning less diesel, etc., etc. The productivity increases that can come from, you know, integrated pest management, whatever. 20% of it can come from farmland carbon storage. So some of the farmers that are doing this mapping are identifying a mosaic of opportunities on their land where they might have some small part of the farm that they think is less productive and could perhaps be put over into some environmental scheme where they can get both environmental payments and carbon payments for the fact that this land is now sequestering carbon rather than contributing carbon. The other major area of reducing carbon emissions is going to be through participating in the bioeconomy. So that could be through green energy production, etc. So we've all seen an increase in AD, we've seen an increase in solar farms, etc. So those are things that have to be balanced carefully at an individual farm level in terms of food production versus alternative land use, but also at a regional and local level. The ELM scheme, as it's coming along, is going to be a big enabler in terms of creating the funding to allow for land use change where a farmer wants to do it. Again, it's a double-edged sword because it's potentially undermining farm production, food security. And we have, in the NFU, identified that there is not enough on offer to suit the fenland environment at the moment. I've been banging on to Janet Hughes at DEFRA, who has been the lead person developing the Elm scheme for a long time, about how we need to do more to pay farmers to do more environmentally positive work with their ditches, because there's been a lot of emphasis in Elms around hedgerow management. We don't have that many hedges in the fens, but we have a lot of ditches. We've seen examples in some of the work that's been done in some of the nature-friendly farming schemes that have operated in Fenland. I'm thinking about up at Thorney and down at Ely, where there's been a lot of ditch management work that has increased biodiversity by taking only minimally more land along the edge of the ditch out of production, or actually building berms into ditches and things like that. So there are things that we could do like that, and although DEFRA have announced some ditch management options that will become available in Elms in summer 24 this summer, we're still pushing that there should be more options to go there. Now, a lot of what I've talked about requires water to do it. And so that's where it was very interesting for me to listen to what Anglian Water were telling you. And they talked about sort of multiple opportunities. I was interested to see that the people they brought to this meeting didn't mention farming specifically once, other than to say that they've got one study looking at it. I mean, we have been meeting with some of the Anglian Water team as the NFU for a very long time, talking about the multiple user benefits that the reservoir could bring. If they're going to have open channel transfer systems, they need to be thinking in terms of linking that in with farmers' plans for their own reservoirs, and the sort of multiple benefits that could be delivered by making sure that if they are developing networks for moving water into and out of the reservoir, that they're also compatible with collaborating farmers' networks of moving water between their reservoir needs. And finally, just on reservoirs, I think, we have very variable experience around the country about how easy it is for farmers to get planning permission for reservoirs on their own land. I think probably it's fair to say Fenland District Council has a better track record than many, but we still hear examples of where planning permissions take too long to get. And so we'd like to see more action there. So hopefully that's a sort of quick run through of what I was asked to talk to you about. We're very pleased to see that the council has set up a committee to look at farming and rural issues, and we'll be happy to work with you going forward in any way we can.
Thank you. Interesting. But very, very, we've heard sort of like 15 minutes. One very thing you touched on very quickly was AD plant. What's your view? You're saying we've got peat disappearing, which I would agree. I mean, obviously, there are various reasons why peat disappears over the years. One, Fenland blows. 2, it goes to the sugar beet factory on sugar beets. 3, it disappears now with turf and stuff like that as well, which we're growing on the fens on good black soil. But actually the AD plant, and feeding these AD plants, we have got field after field around here that's now feeding them. You see that when the tractors are on the field now, they are just puddling and compacting the land. And certainly around the area where I live, I think that's actually giving towards flooding as well, because the land's just not recovering. After 5 years, you're just seeing water lay on top and the peat's just going into the clay. Would you agree that is the case?
A nice, easy, controversial one to begin with. I think, one of the issues around AD plants, and it's not dissimilar to some of the situations around root cropping, is that the growing of the maize, like potatoes, is done on cropping licenses, annual cropping licenses. And sometimes landowners, farmers who grant these cropping licenses are looking for that short-term return. And, you know, it's not for me to tell them what they should or shouldn't do, but I think it's undeniable, as you say, that the effect on the movement of soil from the field, if you haven't actually got a long-term interest in that land, shall we say, doesn't get paid as much attention to as when you do have a long-term interest in that land. But it's, you know, it's a difficult area to think about trying to regulate or legislate on whether you want to constrain individual farmers and individual landowners in the decisions about how they use their land.
Okay, thank you. So can I just come on with a follow-on from that then? Then you go on to solar farms. Now, solar farms, we've got around here as well, taking up good fenland soil where we can grow lots of good stuff, but we then go and cover the area in glass panels. The only thing I can see that underneath is you can have sheep, but apart from that, it has no other benefit. But also, it's catching all the water. Again, what's the NFU's view on that, as opposed to the land being used for its proper use, and solar farms being placed in lesser land usage?
Yeah, well, generally, the NFU has taken the view that, you know, that not best used land should be prioritised for solar, where it's going to be used. Again, as an organisation, we are not going to dictate to individual businesses how they use their land. So we make that point about best and available land should not be prioritised for it. But, you know, at the end of the day, individual businesses are going to make individual decisions about their land. I mean, one of the things that we are pleased to see is that there is increasing innovation in the solar industry to allow for increased cropping use beyond just grazing sheep. I mean, we're talking about vertical panel arrangements coming in, high-level mounted arrangements coming in that allows for cultivation under the panels, etc. So whether that space will evolve sufficiently in time remains to be seen.
Yeah. And this is one of the primary reasons why I don't deal with the NFU. They've lost the way. They've lost their ways of looking after the British farmer. They would sooner get congratulated by the central government, who's owned by the WWF basically, and all work together. Red Tractor's not fit for purpose, which there again comes under the NFU. But you've got solar farms, you've got AD, which creates a hell of a lot of compaction on land, and then mentioning less passes on the next stretch of land. Well, when you've actually grown maize on land for 5 years, that needs some serious cultivating, serious ploughing before you can even think about bringing that back into work. Now, we run direct drills on our farm. Production has dropped 12% on direct drilling to what it is by plough power hour. The only thing it does help with, it gives you one more dose of chemical on blackgrass before you're into do. Why is the NFU trying to play the two sides of the coin? Trying to keep government happy because they're ruled by the WEF, but then trying to keep farmers happy when they're knowing that they're sat on the edge of that sword, flicking from side to side, trying to please everybody and can't.
I think the expression is you can please some of the people some of the time, but you can't please all of the people all of the time. you know, I'm not here to be an apologist for the NFU. I can speak to the areas of NFU policy that I work on. You know, what I don't work on Red Tractor. I would say that, all I would say is, presumably you have seen the statements that came out of the NFU and the AHDB in the last week that have said we need to stop, look again, etc. So I think, you know, the NFU is a broad church, and we have to listen to our membership, and we have to listen to the wider farming community as well, and we try to always listen. I would say that we aren't ever trying to please the government. We are trying to please our members and the farming community. There is nothing in NFU policy that is done to please the government. Sometimes we will take policy positions that are designed to prevent government policy being worse than it already is. And sometimes that gets perceived as being trying to please the government. But I would say that ultimately what we are trying to do is create an environment where farmers can have profitable, successful businesses. Could I come back on that? I mean, I was invited specifically to come and talk to you about climate mitigation. So that's what I've done. But I did conclude my remarks by saying that, you know, we're very pleased to see that Fenland District Council values the farming community and industry enough to have created a committee to consider issues affecting the farming community, and therefore, you know, the NFU, because we are there, you know, the only reason any member does pay us a subscription to belong is because they think we can add value to their business. And so to the extent that there are topics that you as a group feel you can add value to, on which you think that there might be a positive contribution that the NFU can make to the debate and the discussion, we'll be more than happy to come and do that.
I'm sorry, guys. I've got to wrap this up for myself. But I'm just going to hand it over to Jan. I should have been in a meeting with an MP at 4 o'clock tonight, and I'm also at an award session at 6:30 tonight. So I'm going to have to vacate to give my sincere apologies to everybody. But I'll just hand over now to let Jan carry on with the meeting and complete off, if that's okay. But thanks very much. Don't take it personally that I don't work with the NFU at all. Yeah, you'd be welcome back any time. But I'm afraid on me. Same as you. But thank you, folks. I'm sorry for vacating early.
Steve.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I found the starting point, or one of the starting points, about the peat reports very interesting, because I was involved in and remember very clearly the first report that came out with the peat emissions for the Fens, which if I understand you correctly, that then led to the combined authority forming the commission, which then, a body's been set up to look at, and you're saying, you're highly dismissive of the early results, which definitely was a group of, we had the resources of Cambridge University undergraduates for putting that together, that they perhaps didn't have the experience necessary or the data necessary to put forward a more thorough report in that area. It's quite a wide-ranging piece, and Pete was one of them. Because you're still working on the data and good data at the moment, at what point in time do you think you'll be able to give us a statement we can use or a report we can use to really question the overall figures, and say, look, those were wrong, here's a much more accurate figure? Because one of the results was I have a lot of people, particularly those that live in Cambridge and don't live in Fenland, that want to re-wet the fens. It's just simple, look at those figures, let's re-wet the fens. And we have trouble actually talking them into a sense of reasonable position, because we are the breadbasket of England, let's face it. Food security may have some impacts, such as the peat soil impact, and you've got to balance these things. But if we know the data's wrong, when will we be able to say the data's wrong, let's revisit it with this data?
I think we're getting quite close to being able to do that. I mean, we can sort of partially do it now already, but I think what we've seen since that report came out is a massive increase in the amount of data gathering that's happening in the fens. Fenland Soil has been at the heart of first DEFRA funded and now Fenland Soil via CPCA and DEFRA funded flux towers being put out on land to actually measure the greenhouse gas emissions, and we're getting a much more nuanced set of data back about the difference in emissions coming from deep peat soils versus skirt fen versus grassland versus cropland. And so as we're getting that emissions data and putting it together with better data on the actual extent of peat that is left, we're beginning to build up a more accurate figure. So I think, there are partial figures that we can give you now, sort of thing, in terms of we can say, well, the emissions factors that we used in that report, there was a single emissions factor of X tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per hectare of peat are emitted. And we can now say, well, actually, if you look across different soil types, different cropping regimes, there's a range of figures. And what we're not quite there yet on is the quantification across the district as a whole to be able to put a global figure on it. But I would expect, this is something that comes up when we talk to the scientists who are mostly at UKCEH, the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and also at Leicester University. And, in Fenland Soil and the NFU, we're pushing them as hard as we can to globalise that figure for the Cambridgeshire Fens and the wider Fens. And I would hope sort of by the year end we'll have some figures on that. But like I said, we can give sort of individual rebuttals to sort of emissions factors that have been used and that sort of thing.
Just coming back to something Councillor Clark said, and he made a very valid point. We can't change a lot of what's been spoken about today. My concern is land usage that we're seeing now with peat going and everything else, and also the AD plants, the damage it's doing to the land. And it's not going to be long before farmers say, we can't do anything with the land. So then it's going to come to planning, because they're going to want to put houses on it, because they're going to say it's just not profitable to use that land. So I think we do need to be a bit wary as a Fenland that does actually impact us. And also, along with the amount of water that's coming off this land as well, or it's retaining, and going into the IDB dikes and stuff, again, which Fenland has a direct, input on. So I just really sort of like wanted to reiterate why I'd said those two things.
Thank you. Any other speakers? There are no further speakers, therefore the recommendation is for the Rural and Farming Committee to note the latest update from the NFU. Please can you raise your hands if you disagree? Thank you. Well, thank you very much. That was very interesting. And I'm sure the committee would like to have you back at some time for a further update. But we will discuss our next item.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Agenda item 11 is the Advisory Committee's future work programme. Do any members of the committee or officers have any items they would like to put forward for consideration to include the future work programme of the committee? Well, I think Councillor Booth had already put one forward to have Anglia Water maybe come back this time next year. I think. But they did say they would be talking and would have all the options by December 24. Yeah. So it would be nice to know how they're actually getting on with the owners. Yeah. Okay. Can you note that?
Do you think that would be in conjunction with the IDB? Or middle level? Because one does sort of work with the other, and I think, you know, they may be telling us one thing, yet middle level may have concerns that we want to be hearing in front of them.
Very valid point.
Right. Anything else you want on? No. Anna's got one.
Yes, it was brought to my attention recently that the police provided an update for Carol's management team, Carol Pilson, her corporate director, in relation to rural crime. And exploitation of agricultural workers potentially in the area. And I wondered if members would be interested in receiving some information at this committee in respect of those two issues.
Steve. Any other?
The only thing on that is they do kind of provide as part of the Safer Fenland update as well, don't they? So
Fenland Community Safety Partnership.
Yeah, because they do specifically mention that unit. So.
Jeremy.
We're talking about the police, but we also have two other emergency services, one being the fire brigade, one being the ambulance. There is concern always in rural, we can't get an ambulance to go fast because the bumpy roads, we can't, the same with the fire brigade, the various things that they think. Is it something that we should sort of focus in on with the emergency services, just to hear what they have to say regarding rural, how they are backed up rurally? Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, certainly if you've got a back injury, you don't want to be bumping around on one of these roads. You've got a fire engine that's going to a fire, he can only do 30 miles an hour because of the potholes in the road. You know, these are the things that we're getting told. Do we need to focus in on that?
Charlie, I absolutely agree with you, but as you well know, we have great difficulties at this time at county with trying to get a pothole filled in, never mind the very rural roads. You know, we have a battle all the time. I sit on the transport and highways and we're banging our head against a big wall. Yeah.
To be fair, they now send an air ambulance because it gets there quicker than than the actual ambulance itself. So I think it would be good to have the emergency services here to talk to us to say, and there are other problems they get as well, which, you know, again with flooding and stuff like that. Welney, you know, Welney is in our area and the ambulances are having to go round, and so the emergency services, because there isn't the money there. But these are all rural problems that we're having.
Okay, I've just asked Anna to look up the date for our next meeting.
th of October.
Okay. Would you like the emergency service, if possible, to come along? Yeah.
We have the police coming along, but I can't recall when the fire service or ambulance service was in attendance.
Steve. Do we agree? Agenda item 12 is items which the chairman has under item 4 deemed urgent. There are none. So thank you all very much for attending today. I think it was very informative from Anglia Water, and it's a case of wait and see.